66 million years ago, a fiery rock from space slammed into Earth with a force greater than millions of nuclear bombs combined. In an instant, the world of the dinosaurs, the rulers of land, sea and sky for over 160 million years, was thrown into chaos. Forests burned, skies darkened, and the air grew cold and toxic. For a long time, people have imagined this moment as the end of the dinosaurs, but the truth is far more fascinating. Not all dinosaurs vanished overnight. Some clung to life in the shadow of destruction, fighting against starvation, freezing nights, and a world that seemed to be falling apart. Even more astonishing, a small group of feathered dinosaurs managed not only to survive but to adapt, eventually giving rise to the birds that soar above us today. So, how was dinosaur life after the asteroid impact? Before we begin, let us know where in the world you're watching from and what time it is there now. Now, settle in for a journey back in time, to the time when dinosaurs ruled the Earth. Over 66 million years ago, our planet was a very different place. Enormous creatures roamed its surface, filling every forest, swamp, riverbank and plain with life. Dinosaurs were not just animals. They were rulers of the land, sea and air. They had thrived for more than 160 million years, evolving into countless shapes and sizes. Some were towering giants as tall as buildings, while others were small and agile, darting among trees or gliding on leathery wings. The Earth had become their kingdom, and it seemed they were destined to remain the dominant life forms forever. But fate had something else in store. High above in the dark reaches of space, far from the warm safety of Earth's blue skies, a giant rock was on a collision course with our world. This rock was no ordinary stone. It was an asteroid several miles across, travelling at speeds so fast they defy imagination. Imagine a mountain flying through space faster than a bullet. For millions of years it had wandered through the solar system, following its silent path until gravity's invisible pull dragged it toward Earth. In that moment, the destiny of the dinosaurs, and the course of life itself, was about to change forever. On that day, when the asteroid struck, the Earth shook like never before. The moment of impact was so violent that it unleashed energy greater than the explosion of millions of nuclear bombs combined. The asteroid hit what is today the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, carving out a colossal scar on the planet's surface. That scar, known as the Chicxulub crater, still lies buried beneath rock and sediment. The collision released blinding heat, enough to melt stone and ignite forests instantly. In the seconds that followed, waves of fire and molten rock exploded outward from the site of impact, scorching everything for hundreds of miles around. Dinosaurs that lived anywhere near Ground Zero had no chance of survival. They were gone in the blink of an eye, swept away in an inferno unlike anything the world had ever seen. But the disaster did not end there. The asteroid's strike sent shockwaves through the Earth's crust, shaking the land like a giant drum. Huge tsunamis, towering taller than city skyscrapers, raced across ancient seas, smashing into coastlines and flooding vast stretches of land. Volcanoes were triggered in distant regions, spewing ash and lava as if the whole planet itself were convulsing in pain. Above, the skies turned into a battlefield of falling debris. Fragments of red-hot rock rained down across continents, starting wildfires that spread like raging storms. Entire forests went up in flames, filling the air with smoke. The impact had blasted billions of tons of dust and vapour high into the atmosphere, where it formed a thick shroud around the Earth. This blanket of dust and soot blocked sunlight, turning day into night for months and even years. Without sunlight, plants withered. The green world that dinosaurs depended on began to die. Forests fell silent, fields of ferns turned to dust, and the once thriving ecosystem started to collapse. With no plants to feed on, herbivorous dinosaurs starved. With no prey left, the mighty carnivores, such as the tyrannosaurs, followed. Slowly but surely, the giants of Earth fell one by one, victims not just of the impact itself, but of the chain reaction it had set in motion. The Earth grew colder as sunlight vanished. Temperatures plummeted, and the planet entered what scientists call an impact winter. Imagine a world where the skies remain dark for years, where cold winds sweep across barren lands, and where the songs of birds and the calls of animals fade into silence. That was the world after the asteroid strike. The dinosaurs, who had survived predators, droughts, and countless challenges for millions of years, now faced an enemy they could not fight: the collapse of their entire environment. Yet, not all life vanished. Some creatures found ways to endure. Small mammals, which had lived in the shadows of the dinosaurs for millions of years, proved more adaptable. They could burrow into the ground for warmth, feed on seeds or insects that remained, and reproduce quickly. Birds, which were descendants of certain groups of dinosaurs, also survived, carrying forward the legacy of their ancestors into the new age. In the seas, some reptiles and fishes managed to pull through, as did tiny organisms like plankton. Life had been battered, but it was not completely destroyed. The extinction of the dinosaurs was both an ending and a beginning. It marked the close of the Cretaceous period, the final chapter of the Age of Dinosaurs, and the start of the Paleogene period, a new age in Earth's history. With the great reptiles gone, a door opened for mammals to rise. Over the next millions of years, these small survivors evolved into countless forms, eventually giving rise to primates, and much later to humans. In a way, the asteroid that spelled doom for the dinosaurs also paved the path for us to exist. When we look back at that ancient event, it is staggering to think of how a single moment could alter the course of life on Earth. One rock from space, falling at just the right angle and speed, ended the reign of the dinosaurs and reshaped the destiny of our planet. Even now, scientists study the Chicxulub crater and the rocks that hold traces of the impact. They find evidence of shocked quartz, tiny glassy droplets called tektites, and layers of iridium, a rare metal more common in asteroids than on Earth. These discoveries confirm that the dinosaurs' end was not caused by slow decline alone, but by a sudden and catastrophic blow from the heavens. The story is written in stone, waiting for us to uncover and piece together. The thought of the asteroid event stirs both fear and wonder. It shows the violence of the cosmos, where silent wanderers of rock and ice can one day alter the fate of entire worlds. But it also shows the resilience of life, which even after unimaginable destruction, found a way to survive, adapt, and flourish again. Without that impact, the Earth today might still belong to dinosaurs, and we would never have come to be. When we walk through museums and see the towering skeletons of creatures like Tyrannosaurus rex or Triceratops, we are reminded of that lost world. These bones are not just relics of ancient animals, but symbols of a vanished era. They whisper of jungles filled with thunderous footsteps, of seas ruled by great reptiles, and of skies that once darkened under the wings of giant pterosaurs. And they also whisper of the fiery day when a mountain from space struck the Earth and brought it all to an end. Yet in another way, the dinosaurs live on. Birds that perch on our windowsills soar over oceans or sing in forests are their descendants. Every sparrow, eagle, and hummingbird carries in its DNA a trace of that mighty lineage. Life did not end with the asteroid. It transformed, finding new forms and paths. The Earth is still writing its story, and the asteroid strike is one of its most dramatic chapters. The world more than 66 million years ago was alive with thunderous footsteps, the cries of giant reptiles and forests stretching across the land like green oceans. It was a time when dinosaurs ruled, when massive flying creatures soared over primeval seas, and when strange mammals, still small and cautious, hid in the shadows. Yet, in a single moment, the course of Earth's history was changed forever. A rock from the heavens, more than 10 kilometers wide, came hurtling toward the planet with unstoppable force. When it struck the shallow waters near what we now call the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, it released an amount of energy greater than all the nuclear weapons humanity could ever build combined. The dinosaurs, who had reigned for more than 160 million years, had no idea that this was the day their age would end. The impact itself was violent beyond imagination, but it was the immediate aftermath. The fires, earthquakes, and tsunamis that spread terror across the Earth within moments of the strike. To understand this, we must try to picture the world as it was in the minutes, hours, and days after the asteroid's arrival. The asteroid entered the atmosphere at an unbelievable speed, faster than a bullet, faster than sound, faster than anything the dinosaurs had ever experienced. As it plunged through the air, it created a fiery trail, heating the atmosphere so intensely that the skies must have looked like they were set ablaze even before the strike. When it finally slammed into Earth, it vaporized instantly along with much of the crust where it landed. Rock turned into plasma. Oceans boiled away in the immediate area. The blast left behind a crater more than 150 kilometers wide and about 20 kilometers deep. It was as if the planet itself had been struck with a wound that would never truly heal. The very first consequence was fire. The colossal amount of energy released did not just stay in one place. The asteroid's impact sent a shockwave of heat into the atmosphere, throwing molten rock, dust and vaporized material high above the clouds, and then raining it back down across entire continents. Every piece of this ejecta, when falling through the air, glowed like a meteor, heating the skies and igniting forests. Imagine standing anywhere on Earth and seeing the horizon filled with streaks of light, millions of shooting stars falling at once. But instead of fading away, they set trees, plants, and even the ground itself aflame. Fires raged across thousands of kilometers. Entire jungles turned into seas of flame. Smoke filled the air until day became as dark as night. Dinosaurs that survived the initial blast found themselves fleeing burning forests, choking on ash and smoke, unable to escape the infernos that stretched as far as they could see. But the fires were only one part of the chaos. The Earth itself trembled violently. The impact released energy that rippled through the crust in waves of unimaginable force. The shock was equivalent to countless massive earthquakes striking all at once. The ground cracked open in many places. Mountains shook as though they were made of sand. Volcanoes far from the impact site may have been triggered to erupt, spewing lava and more ash into the atmosphere. Earthquakes rolled across the continents, toppling forests and creating landslides that buried creatures alive. Animals that had managed to survive the falling fires were now faced with a world shaking beneath their feet, a land that no longer felt stable or safe. For the dinosaurs, who had once been the unchallenged masters of Earth, it was a terrifying new reality. While the ground shook and the forests burned, the seas themselves were also thrown into violent upheaval. The asteroid had struck shallow water, but the force of the impact displaced an unimaginable volume of ocean. Waves higher than the tallest buildings humans would one day construct rose from the site of the impact. These were not ordinary waves, but tsunamis, walls of water so massive they travelled across oceans. The first waves may have reached hundreds of meters in height near the impact zone, towering over islands and coastlines, wiping away everything in their path. Entire herds of coastal dinosaurs, ancient reptiles that lived by the shore, and even creatures of the sea were caught in the rushing torrents. The waves did not stop at the Gulf of Mexico. They radiated outward like ripples from a stone dropped into a pond, but on a planetary scale. Hours after the impact, tsunamis reached distant coasts, flooding land thousands of kilometers away. North America's inland seas were reshaped by these massive surges. Low-lying regions were drowned, and habitats that had supported countless animals and plants were destroyed in a single day. For marine life, the sudden change in sea level, temperature and currents was devastating. Coral reefs shattered, and shallow ecosystems were ripped apart. Even creatures that lived deep in the water would have been affected as sediment and debris clouded the seas, blocking out sunlight. To imagine the immediate aftermath more vividly, picture the timeline. In the first seconds after impact, a blinding flash brighter than the sun scorched the land, vaporizing everything in the immediate area. Within minutes, shockwaves had circled the globe, shaking the ground in earthquakes that dwarfed the strongest tremors humans would ever record. Within hours, fiery material falling from the sky ignited global wildfires, while tsunamis crashed onto shores thousands of kilometers away. The Earth was being transformed not slowly, but violently and instantly. The creatures of that time could not have understood what was happening. Dinosaurs that had roamed peacefully through forests only hours earlier now faced burning skies, shaking earth, and rising seas. Pterosaurs that had soared gracefully above oceans were torn from the air by hurricane-force winds generated by the impact. Mammals, still small and timid, scrambled for shelter in underground burrows, perhaps giving them a better chance of survival than the great reptiles above. The world had become a nightmare of fire, water, and broken stone. Fires alone would have killed untold numbers of dinosaurs and other creatures. Whole regions would have been turned into barren ash fields. The smoke and soot would have blocked sunlight, plunging the world into darkness even before the longer global winter set in. Earthquakes would have crushed landscapes, creating new lakes where rivers were diverted and raising new ridges where land was pushed upward. Tsunamis would have erased coastlines, leaving nothing of the once thriving habitats along the shores. It was as though three of nature's most destructive forces, fire, earth, and water, had conspired together in one devastating moment. One of the most chilling aspects of this immediate aftermath is how quickly it spread. Unlike slow changes that occur over millions of years, this catastrophe unfolded in mere hours and days. By the end of the first day, the world was unrecognizable. Fires had blackened forests, earthquakes had torn apart the land, and tsunamis had redrawn the maps of the coasts. Survivors wandered through a landscape that must have seemed cursed, with no safe refuge from the chaos. We can also imagine the sounds of that world. The roar of flames consuming forests, the deep rumble of earthquakes shaking mountains, the thunder of waves crashing onto shores. These noises would have blended into a deafening chorus of destruction. Animals would have cried out in terror, but their voices were drowned by the relentless fury of the planet. Even the skies themselves were not silent, as fiery debris streaked across the heavens and then crashed to the ground with explosions that echoed across valleys and plains. And yet, in this moment of overwhelming destruction, the seeds of change were being sown. For while countless species perished in the fires, earthquakes, and tsunamis, a few managed to endure. The small mammals hiding underground, the creatures of the deep seas far from the coasts, and certain plants with the ability to regrow after fire. All of these would one day inherit a world reshaped by catastrophe. But in those first days, survival was uncertain. Fires could smoulder for weeks, consuming all that remained. Earthquakes could continue as aftershocks, striking again and again as the crust settled. Tsunamis could return in waves, flooding coasts repeatedly. There was no rest for the survivors, no pause in the chaos. The earth was in upheaval, and everything that had once seemed eternal, the reign of the dinosaurs, the stability of the continents, the familiar cycles of day and night, was gone. The immediate aftermath of the asteroid impact was, in truth, the opening act of a much longer tragedy. The fires, earthquakes, and tsunamis were the first blows, but they were followed by darkness, cold, and famine as the dust and soot lingered in the atmosphere. Still, even among these horrors, the image of those first moments, the burning skies, the shaking earth, and the towering waves, remains one of the most terrifying and awe-inspiring events in the history of our planet. It was a day when the Earth itself seemed determined to erase what had come before, clearing the stage for a new chapter in life's story. When a massive asteroid crashed into Earth at the end of the age of dinosaurs, it unleashed a series of terrifying events that shook the entire planet. The explosion itself was unimaginably powerful, but the real danger did not end with the fireball, the shockwaves, or even the giant tsunamis. What followed in the months and years after the impact was something even more devastating, something that transformed the Earth from a warm, lively world into a dark and freezing planet. Scientists call this terrifying period an impact winter. To understand what that means, we have to imagine what the Earth looked like right after the asteroid hit, and how the chain reaction of destruction continued long after the first explosion. The asteroid that struck Earth about 66 million years ago was several miles wide, and when it smashed into the Yucatan Peninsula in what is now Mexico, it released energy equal to billions of nuclear bombs going off at once. The explosion tore a hole in the ground more than 100 miles across and over 12 miles deep. Rocks, dirt, and pieces of the Earth's crust were blasted into the sky, with such force that many of them shot right out of the atmosphere before falling back down. Fires raged across forests, giant waves swept across oceans, and earthquakes shook the continents. But the greatest and most far-reaching effect came from what was launched into the sky. The impact produced an enormous amount of dust, ash, and vaporized rock. In addition to this, the fires that burned across entire continents released smoke and soot. Volcanoes were also triggered in some parts of the world, adding even more ash and gases to the atmosphere. All of these tiny particles rose high into the stratosphere, far above the level where rain clouds form. Normally, if there is dust in the air, rain eventually washes it out, but this layer was far above where rain could reach. That meant the sky stayed clogged with dark particles for a very long time. As the debris spread, the skies began to darken. Imagine standing in the middle of the day and finding the world turning dim, as though the sun itself had been covered with a blanket. At first, it may have seemed like a passing storm, but as the days turned into weeks, the darkness did not go away. The particles in the air were so thick that sunlight could not properly reach the ground. Scientists believe that within days of the impact, the Earth was plunged into a kind of twilight that lasted for months, and in some regions, almost total darkness. This sudden loss of sunlight had immediate and devastating consequences. Plants, which depend on sunlight for photosynthesis, could no longer produce food. Fields, forests, and oceans alike were affected. On land, plants withered quickly, while in the oceans, plankton, the tiny organisms at the base of the marine food chain, began to die off. Without sunlight, photosynthesis collapsed, and with it, the foundation of nearly all life. The lack of sunlight also caused global temperatures to drop sharply. The Earth's surface cooled rapidly, leading to what scientists call an impact winter. It was as if the world had been thrown into a sudden, unnatural ice age. Temperatures in many places may have dropped by more than 20 degrees Celsius within weeks. The chill was not only harsh for living creatures, but also destructive for entire ecosystems. Animals that depended on warm climates struggled to survive. Reptiles, especially large dinosaurs that needed warmth, faced a crisis they could not overcome. Mammals, though small and better at finding shelter, still faced hunger and freezing conditions. The oceans, which usually act as buffers against sudden temperature changes, also began to cool. Cold surface waters mixed with deeper waters, disrupting ocean currents. This, in turn, changed weather patterns all over the world. Rainfall in some places may have almost stopped, while other areas might have faced violent storms as the planet tried to rebalance itself. But perhaps the most frightening part of the impact winter was how long it lasted. The soot and dust in the sky did not clear up quickly. Some estimates suggest that the Earth remained in darkness for several months, with very little light reaching the surface. Even after the darkest period passed, the skies stayed dim for years. Full sunlight may not have returned for nearly a decade. During this time, plants struggled to grow, animals starved, and ecosystems broke down. To imagine how severe this was, think about a normal volcanic eruption, like Mount Tambora in Indonesia in the year 1815. That single eruption was so powerful that it threw ash into the sky and caused what people called the year without a summer. Crops failed in Europe and North America, and millions of people suffered from famine. Now imagine not just one volcano, but thousands of times more material being thrown into the sky at once, blocking sunlight across the entire planet. That gives us a small idea of how terrible the asteroid impact winter must have been. The effect on the food chain was catastrophic. Without plants and plankton, herbivores starved. With herbivores dying, carnivores soon followed. The dinosaurs, which had ruled the Earth for more than 160 million years, could not adapt to this sudden collapse of their food sources. Some small creatures that could burrow, hibernate, or survive on scraps managed to cling to life. Insects, rodents, and some amphibians and reptiles found ways to endure. Crocodiles, for example, could survive in water and feed on what little was left, while turtles could go long periods without food. But the giant land dinosaurs, whether plant-eaters or meat-eaters, were doomed. The impact winter also affected the chemistry of the atmosphere. The intense fires released large amounts of carbon dioxide, but at the same time, the soot and dust prevented sunlight from warming the Earth. Sulfur compounds, created when the asteroid struck sulfur-rich rocks, mixed with water vapor in the atmosphere to form sulfuric acid. This led to acid rain, which poisoned lakes, rivers, and soils. Plants that might have survived the darkness now faced acidic water that damaged their leaves and roots. Aquatic life suffered too, as acid rain fell into rivers and oceans, changing their chemistry and making survival even harder for fish and other marine creatures. The oceans also became more hostile because of another effect. As carbon dioxide built up, much of it was absorbed by seawater, making the oceans more acidic. This weakened shells and skeletons of marine organisms such as corals, clams, and tiny plankton called foraminifera. With plankton gone, entire ocean food chains collapsed. The seas, which had once been full of giant reptiles and swarms of fish, turned into near-empty wastelands. For humans today, it may be hard to imagine the world in such a state. We're used to sunlight, seasons, and the rhythm of life that depends on warmth and light. But for years after the asteroid impact, the Earth was a planet of cold, gloom, and silence. Forests stood blackened by fire, grasslands shriveled, and the air carried the smell of smoke and decay. The skies may have glowed with a strange red or brown haze as sunlight scattered through layers of dust. Nights were even darker than usual because moonlight was dimmed as well. The world must have felt endless, like a long night that never fully turned into day. The creatures that survived did so by sheer adaptability and luck. Some mammals hid in burrows, surviving on stored food or insects. Some birds, which are distant relatives of dinosaurs, managed to make it through, perhaps by eating seeds, which could endure long periods without sunlight. Seeds hidden in the soil could remain dormant until the sunlight returned, and then sprout again, giving life a chance to recover. Slowly, after years of darkness, the skies began to clear, the sun returned, and plants started to grow again. But the recovery was not quick. It took hundreds of thousands of years for ecosystems to fully rebuild, and millions of years for new species to evolve and fill the empty roles left by the dinosaurs. The impact winter reshaped life on Earth forever. It cleared the way for mammals to rise, eventually leading to the appearance of primates and much later, human beings. The collapse of plant life and food chains after a great catastrophe such as an asteroid strike or a massive volcanic eruption is one of the most terrifying and fascinating events to imagine in the history of our planet. To understand this kind of collapse, one must picture how fragile the balance of life on Earth really is. Plants, which seem so quiet and ordinary, are in truth the foundation of nearly every living system on the planet. They are the silent workers that build energy from sunlight, converting it into food and oxygen. Without them, animals cannot survive, and without animals, the intricate web of life unravels. When something so huge and sudden destroys the conditions that plants need to live, the effects ripple through the whole planet until even the strongest creatures are left with nothing. Imagine for a moment the world before disaster strikes. Vast forests of ferns and conifers stretch across the land, grasslands sway in the wind, and flowering plants open their bright colours to attract insects. Algae bloom in lakes, rivers and seas, quietly producing oxygen and feeding small aquatic creatures. Plants are not just beautiful decorations. They are the producers, the beginning of the food chain. Every herbivore depends on them directly, whether it is a tiny insect nibbling on leaves or a massive dinosaur tearing down tree branches. Every carnivore, no matter how fearsome, depends on herbivores, which means they depend on plants indirectly. A predator like a Tyrannosaurus rex may never eat a single leaf, but it still owes its existence to plants, because the herbivores it hunts could not live without vegetation. The chain is tight and unbreakable, until something comes along strong enough to snap it. When an asteroid the size of a mountain struck Earth around 66 million years ago, it did not just kill animals in the blast. The real devastation came afterward, in the long, slow collapse of plants and the food chains that linked all living things. At first, the land shook and fires raged across forests and plains. Trees were uprooted, grasslands burned, and entire regions turned into charred wastelands. But those fires, terrible as they were only the beginning. The true disaster was in the skies. Dust, ash, and tiny particles thrown upward by the impact spread across the atmosphere, forming a thick, choking blanket that blocked sunlight. Days became dim, then darker still until sunlight could hardly reach the surface. Without sunlight, photosynthesis slowed, then stopped. Plants could no longer make food, no longer grow, no longer survive. Think about how quickly this collapse must have happened. A tree, even if it survived the first fires, could not last long if it could not make food from sunlight. Grasses and flowering plants withered. Leaves turned yellow, then brown and fell away. Algae in the oceans, which also rely on light, could not bloom. Within weeks to months, much of the green world shriveled. In some places, cold and frost joined in, because without sunlight the planet cooled. Tropical forests became graveyards of fallen leaves. Grasslands became empty stretches of dead stalks. Even seeds waiting in the ground for the right moment to sprout could not find enough warmth or light to begin growing. Animals that relied on plants were the first to suffer. Herbivorous dinosaurs, from the horned triceratops to the duck-billed hadrosaurs, suddenly had nothing to eat. Their herds, which once roamed in thousands, began to weaken. Hungry and desperate, they may have wandered for days in search of food, finding only withered shrubs or the blackened remains of forests. The great sauropods, with their long necks reaching high into trees, would have been especially doomed. Their giant bodies required enormous amounts of food each day, and when the trees died, so did they. Smaller plant eaters fared little better. With so little to feed on, competition became fierce. Some starved, others fought and tore each other apart in the scramble for survival. The collapse did not stop with herbivores. Carnivores soon felt the chain reaction. At first, predators like tyrannosaurs may have benefited, finding weakened and starving prey easy to kill. But as the weeks dragged into months, the prey themselves vanished. When there are no herbivores, there are no carnivores either. The strongest predator cannot live without food, and so one by one, the meat-eaters followed the plant-eaters into extinction. In this way, the mighty top of the food chain fell, not in an instant, but as the final victim of a long downward spiral that had begun with the death of plants. The oceans suffered just as much, if not more. Algae and phytoplankton, the tiny plant-like creatures of the sea, are the ocean's grasslands. They float near the surface, turning sunlight into energy, and they are the first step of nearly every marine food chain. Tiny animals feed on them, small fish eat the tiny animals, bigger fish eat the small fish, and so on until whales, sharks, and marine reptiles feed at the top. When the skies darkened and sunlight no longer reached the water, the algae died off. The chain collapsed almost immediately. Without plankton, entire schools of fish perished. The great marine reptiles such as mosasaurs and plesiosaurs soon followed. Even creatures as resilient as ammonites, which had survived earlier disasters, could not make it. This collapse was not only about hunger, it was about the breakdown of a world system that had taken millions upon millions of years to build. Plants are not only food makers, they are also oxygen producers. As vast areas of forests and algae disappeared, oxygen levels in the atmosphere may have dropped. At the same time, decaying plant matter released carbon and other gases, further changing the climate. The Earth became a place of gloom, cold, and poison. Survival was not just about finding food, it was about finding a place where the very air and climate did not kill you. Yet, as complete as this collapse seems, life has a strange way of enduring. Not every plant perished. Some seeds lay dormant in the soil, waiting for conditions to improve. Some hardy species, such as ferns, were able to sprout quickly in the ashes of destruction. In fact, fossil records show what scientists call a fern spike after the asteroid impact, a sudden abundance of ferns growing in places where forests had been destroyed. Ferns are tough survivors. They can grow in poor soil and do not need as much light as other plants. They became the first green shoots of recovery, the first signs that life was not completely finished. Similarly, not every food chain collapsed beyond repair. In the oceans, some plankton species managed to cling to existence in sheltered areas or deep waters. Certain small animals that could eat dead material, such as detritus, instead of relying entirely on living plants, were able to survive. These small survivors formed the seeds of new food webs. Over time, they expanded again, giving rise to the marine life we know today. The collapse of plant life and food chains after the great asteroid strike was, in many ways, the end of one world and the beginning of another. Dinosaurs, for all their power and majesty, could not survive a world without plants. But mammals, small and adaptable, often able to eat many kinds of food, including seeds, insects, and carrion, managed to make it through. Birds, too, survived, perhaps because their ancestors could eat seeds and other food sources that lasted longer. These survivors built new food chains, founded on whatever scraps of plant life returned, and from them, in time, grew the diversity of life we see today. It is important to imagine how sudden and brutal this change must have felt. One day, Lush green forests and endless plains of food stretched across the land. A few weeks later, the skies were dim, the air was cold and the ground was bare. Animals wandered starving, plants shriveled into dust, and oceans once full of life turned into empty deserts of water. The collapse of plant life was not just the death of greenery, it was the unravelling of the very threads that held life together. Life for the largest dinosaurs that once walked the earth was never easy, even though at first glance they may appear like unstoppable giants. These animals, some of them longer than the length of several buses and taller than the highest trees, faced daily battles for survival in a world that was both full of opportunities and filled with dangers. To understand the struggles they endured, one must imagine a planet that was constantly changing, with climates shifting, landscapes transforming, predators lurking, and food sometimes becoming scarce. The survival struggles of large land dinosaurs were not simple, but rather a constant test of strength, intelligence, and adaptation. These animals were not just enormous creatures wandering aimlessly. They were living beings forced to deal with hunger, thirst, harsh weather, injuries, competition, and the threat of extinction every single day. The largest dinosaurs, such as the long-necked sauropods, could reach lengths of over 100 feet and weigh as much as 70 tons. Moving bodies of such size required enormous amounts of food, and this was one of their greatest daily struggles. Imagine an animal that needed to eat hundreds of pounds of plants each day just to stay alive. In forests and plains, they had to find enough leaves, ferns, and soft vegetation to satisfy their gigantic appetites. Unlike smaller animals that could survive on less, these massive creatures needed a constant supply of food, or else they would weaken quickly. Whole herds of sauropods may have travelled across the land in search of new feeding grounds, stripping trees bare and then moving on when nothing was left. This nomadic lifestyle was necessary, but it also left them vulnerable, for travelling across vast distances exposed them to predators, accidents, and exhaustion. The problem of food was not limited to plant-eating giants alone. The large carnivorous dinosaurs, such as Tyrannosaurus rex, faced an equally difficult challenge. Hunting prey of such massive size was no easy task, even for a predator with enormous teeth and a bone-crushing bite. Each hunt carried risks, because if a predator was injured, even slightly, it could mean death from starvation. Unlike today's lions that can hunt in groups, many large carnivorous dinosaurs are believed to have hunted alone, and so they had no help when things went wrong. A broken tooth, a torn muscle, or a failed chase could make the difference between survival and death. For them, finding enough meat to feed their huge bodies was as much a daily struggle as finding plants was for the sauropods. Another great difficulty was the need for water. Large dinosaurs could not live long without rivers, lakes, or swamps to drink from. During dry seasons, when rain failed to fall for weeks or even months, water sources would shrink or disappear completely. In such times, herds of dinosaurs were forced to march across great distances in desperate search for new watering holes. This migration was dangerous because not only did the journey itself exhaust the animals, but predators often gathered near shrinking waterholes, waiting to ambush the thirsty travellers. Imagine a scene where dozens of thirsty sauropods trudged slowly toward the last remaining pond, while hungry carnivores watched from the shadows, ready to strike at the weakest among them. For the dinosaurs, water was life, but reaching it often meant risking everything. The struggle for survival was also deeply tied to the climate. During the long reign of the dinosaurs, the Earth went through many changes. At times, the climate was warm and lush, with vast forests spreading across continents, providing endless food. But at other times, droughts, floods, volcanic eruptions, and shifting seas made life extremely harsh. When volcanoes erupted, clouds of ash could block sunlight for weeks or months, reducing plant growth and making it difficult for herbivores to find enough to eat. Without plants, the carnivores also suffered, for their prey grew weak or died in large numbers. Floods could drown nesting grounds and wash away young dinosaurs, while long droughts could kill entire herds. The climate was a silent but powerful enemy, one that dinosaurs could never fully defeat, only endure. Reproduction and raising young was another battle that shaped the fate of large dinosaurs. Despite their enormous size, most dinosaurs did not give birth to live young, but instead laid eggs. These eggs, though sometimes quite large, were still fragile and vulnerable to predators, weather, and accidents. Entire nests could be destroyed by floods, trampled by herds, or raided by smaller animals looking for an easy meal. For a mother dinosaur, protecting her eggs or hatchlings was nearly impossible when she also needed to find food for herself. Many baby dinosaurs never survived their first days, meaning that adults had to lay many eggs in hopes that just a few would reach adulthood. For the survival of a species, this was a risky system, but it was the only one they knew. It created a constant cycle of struggle, where only the strongest and luckiest survived to carry on the line. Disease and injury also played a large role in their survival battles. Paleontologists have found fossil bones showing evidence of infections, arthritis, broken limbs, and even cancer. For a giant animal, a broken leg could mean certain death, as it would be unable to walk to find food or escape predators. Even small injuries could become infected, and without medicine, these wounds could quickly grow fatal. Some bones show signs of healed injuries, proving that dinosaurs were tough and resilient, but many others suggest lives cut short by misfortune. Survival was often decided not just by size or strength, but by luck and the ability to endure pain. Competition among species added another layer of difficulty. Large herbivores competed with each other for access to the best feeding grounds. Entire herds may have clashed at riverbanks or in fertile valleys, pushing weaker groups aside. Carnivores, too, fought fiercely for dominance, with rival predators challenging each other for territory or food. Even members of the same species may have fought bloody battles, as males competed for mates or to protect their status within a group. These fights often left deep scars, broken bones, or even death. Survival meant not only escaping the dangers of the natural world, but also facing constant conflict with one's own kind. Size itself, while often seen as the greatest advantage of the largest dinosaurs, was also a burden. Moving such massive bodies was slow and energy-intensive, making it difficult to escape quickly from danger. A large sauropod could probably crush smaller predators underfoot, but once a determined pack or a single giant carnivore targeted it, escape was difficult. The very bulk that protected them also made them vulnerable in certain situations, such as getting stuck in mud or trapped by rivers. Fossil evidence suggests that some dinosaurs may have died in such traps, unable to free themselves while scavengers moved in. In this way, being huge was both a blessing and a curse. The constant need for energy shaped the behavior of large dinosaurs in profound ways. Some may have travelled in massive herds to protect themselves, while others may have relied on long migrations to keep up with changing food supplies. The movements of these giants must have shaped entire landscapes, as they trampled forests, carved pathways, and even altered the growth of plants by feeding on them in vast numbers. Yet such power came with the endless need to move, eat, and survive, leaving little room for rest or comfort. Survival struggles were not limited to the adults alone. Young dinosaurs, even those of giant species, started life small and vulnerable. A hatchling sauropod was tiny compared to the adults, and it faced predators at every step. Only by growing quickly and avoiding danger could it hope to reach maturity. Fossilized trackways show groups of young dinosaurs traveling together, possibly for protection, while the adults may have roamed separately. Growing from a fragile hatchling into a towering giant was itself a struggle that few survived. As millions of years passed, these struggles shaped the evolution of dinosaurs, forcing them to adapt in countless ways. Long necks allowed sauropods to reach food high in trees, reducing competition with smaller plant eaters. Enormous size offered protection from predators, though it required even greater food supplies. Sharp teeth and powerful jaws gave carnivores the tools to bring down prey, while keen senses helped them hunt more effectively. Yet for every adaptation that helped, new challenges arose, keeping the balance of survival delicate and uncertain. When we look at the fossilized bones of these great creatures today, we often admire their size and imagine them as invincible rulers of the ancient world. But the truth is more complex. Their daily lives were filled with uncertainty, struggle, and danger. The forests, plains, and swamps of the Mesozoic era were not peaceful places, but battlegrounds where life and death were decided at every moment. Every roar, every clash, every step taken by these giants was part of an endless fight to endure in a world that offered no guarantees. Smaller dinosaurs had a far better chance of surviving the great catastrophe, that ended the age of the giants, and the reasons for this are as fascinating as they are tragic. To understand why this was so, we must picture the world as it was more than 66 million years ago, when a fiery rock from space, larger than a mountain, came crashing into the Earth. This single event shook the planet, caused oceans to boil and forests to burn, and brought an end to the reign of the mighty creatures that had ruled for more than 160 million years. Yet, out of this chaos, it was not the largest, most powerful dinosaurs that endured, but the smaller ones, the quick, the light-footed, and the ones that could adapt to sudden change. Their survival was not a matter of strength or ferocity, but of flexibility, cleverness, and luck in a harsh and unforgiving world. Large dinosaurs had ruled the land with their size and power. Some, like the towering sauropods, stretched as long as several city buses, with necks that reached into the trees like living cranes. Others, like the fearsome tyrannosaurs, had jaws so powerful that no creature stood a chance once they closed around their prey. Yet these giants were also prisoners of their size. They needed enormous amounts of food each day just to stay alive, whether it was tons of plants for the long-necked herbivores or a constant supply of meat for the giant hunters. When the asteroid struck, it was this very need that doomed them. The forests burned, the skies grew dark with ash, and plants withered without sunlight. With the collapse of plant life, the entire food chain crumbled. For the great beasts that needed mountains of food, survival became impossible. By contrast, the smaller dinosaurs, though often overlooked in tales of prehistoric life, had very different needs. A creature no bigger than a chicken or a turkey could survive on far less. It could find seeds, insects, small lizards, or anything edible in the debris of a ruined forest. Some of these small dinosaurs had beaks well suited for cracking seeds, which could survive buried in the ground through fire and cold. Others had the speed and agility to dart out and grab an insect or scavenge from the remains of larger animals that had perished. In a world where every scrap of food mattered, being small was a great advantage. Another important reason smaller dinosaurs had better chances was that they were quicker to reproduce and required less time to grow. A giant sauropod might take decades to reach its full size, needing years of steady food supplies to survive to adulthood. A large predator like a tyrannosaur needed vast hunting grounds to raise its young, with every generation depending on stability and abundance. But a small dinosaur could lay a clutch of eggs, hatchlings could grow within a single year, and even if many died, some would always find a way through. This ability to bounce back quickly meant that smaller species could keep surviving even when disasters struck again and again. Smaller body size also meant smaller territory. Large carnivores needed to roam across miles of land to hunt enough prey, and when prey vanished, they starved. Smaller species could live in smaller patches of habitat, making do with scraps. They could hide in burrows, squeeze into crevices, and make nests in sheltered corners where the devastation was less severe. During the impact winter, when the world was dark and freezing, such hiding places became lifelines. A huge tyrannosaur could not crawl underground to escape the bitter cold or choking ash, but a chicken-sized dinosaur could dig or find a burrow already made by other animals and wait it out. Flight and gliding were also major factors. Some of the smaller dinosaurs had already begun to develop wings, feathers, and the ability to glide between trees or even fly short distances. These feathered creatures, which were the ancestors of modern birds, had a mobility that larger land-bound dinosaurs could not match. They could escape areas of devastation more easily, flying to regions where food still remained. They could swoop down to snatch seeds or insects and then retreat quickly to safety. This gave them one more edge in a world that was rapidly becoming too hostile for most land animals. Another advantage of smaller dinosaurs was their ability to change diet more easily. Large herbivores depended on vast forests and fields of vegetation, which disappeared after the impact. Large carnivores depended on other large animals, which also vanished. But smaller dinosaurs could shift from plants to insects, from insects to seeds, from seeds to carrion, depending on what was available. This flexibility in eating habits made them survivors where more specialized and rigid feeders perished. A small omnivorous dinosaur could nibble on anything edible, even scraps of decaying matter, while a massive giant could starve despite standing in a ruined forest filled with things too small or too tough for it to eat. It is also important to consider the climate that followed the asteroid impact. The the skies filled with ash and dust, blocking the sun for months and even years. The earth grew cold, plants withered, and many ecosystems collapsed. Large animals lose heat more slowly, but they also need steady supplies of food to keep their massive bodies running. Smaller animals, while vulnerable to freezing, could conserve energy by going into states similar to hibernation, slowing down their metabolism or hiding in insulated spaces. Some scientists believe that small feathered dinosaurs could fluff their feathers to trap heat, giving them protection during the bitter cold spells. This ability, combined with their small size, gave them better odds of surviving the long winters that followed the impact. Another factor was water. After the asteroid struck, rainfall patterns changed. Acid rain fell from the sky, lakes became toxic, and clean water was harder to find. Large dinosaurs needed great amounts of water, just as they needed mountains of food. But smaller dinosaurs could survive on tiny amounts, sometimes obtaining the moisture they needed from food itself, or from dew, or from small puddles that larger animals would not even notice. This small demand on resources meant they had more opportunities to endure when the world was stripped bare. Even before the asteroid hit, smaller dinosaurs were already showing signs of being more adaptable. Fossils reveal a wide variety of them, from bird-like hunters that darted through forests to tiny seed-eaters that lived in flocks. Their diversity gave them an advantage, because when disaster came, at least some of these varied lifestyles matched the new world. The larger dinosaurs were more uniform, giant plant-eaters on one side, giant predators on the other. When their food systems collapsed, they had little room to adapt. The smaller dinosaurs, on the other hand, had already experimented with many survival strategies, and some of those strategies turned out to be exactly what the new Earth demanded. We should also imagine the scene after the fires, earthquakes, and tsunamis that followed the impact. Carcasses of great beasts lay scattered, forests reduced to ash, rivers clogged with debris. For a giant dinosaur, the destruction was the end. But for smaller ones, it was a grim feast. They could pick at remains, gnaw at bones, eat insects drawn to decay, or find seeds buried beneath rubble. What looked like a dead world to a sauropod might look like an endless buffet to a small scavenger. The very scale of the disaster which punished the mighty gave new life to the small. Over time, this survival of the smaller dinosaurs shaped the future of life itself. The line of feathered small dinosaurs, the ones that had learned to fly, did not just survive, they thrived. They spread across the world, filled empty ecological spaces, and eventually gave rise to the birds we know today. Every sparrow, eagle, and pigeon is a living echo of those small survivors. If the large dinosaurs had been able to endure, perhaps birds as we know them would never have flourished. In this way, the fall of the giants was also the rise of the small. This story also teaches us about survival in general. Strength and size, though impressive, do not always bring long-lasting success. The great predators and massive plant-eaters seemed invincible during their age, but when the world changed, they had no escape. The small, the overlooked, the ones that could live with less and adapt to more, proved to be the true champions of endurance. The survival of smaller dinosaurs was not about power, but about resilience, about finding ways to bend without breaking. Even the idea of intelligence may have played a role. Smaller dinosaurs, especially those closer to birds, often had relatively larger brains compared to their body size. This might have allowed them to be more curious, more flexible, and more able to find new solutions in a world turned upside down. Perhaps some learned new ways of foraging, of using tools like sticks to dig, or of hiding nests in safer places. While this cannot be proven with certainty, it is clear that adaptability of mind, just as much as adaptability of body, was vital for survival. We can imagine the contrast vividly. Picture a towering tyrannosaur, its massive frame striding through a dead forest, roaring with hunger, yet unable to find enough prey to sustain itself. Now picture a small feathered dinosaur, no bigger than a crow, hopping among the fallen logs, pecking at insects, finding seeds, sheltering in crevices, and laying eggs in hidden places. The giant, once lord of the land, starves within weeks. The tiny creature, ignored and underestimated, continues on, generation after generation, until its kind becomes the dominant flyers of the skies. The asteroid impact was sudden, violent, and global, but in many ways it was simply another test of survival, Over millions of years, Earth has faced many such tests: volcanic eruptions, ice ages, shifting continents. Each time, the survivors are not always the ones we would expect. The story of the smaller dinosaurs is one of the clearest examples of this truth. By the time the Earth began to recover, with forests regrowing and climate stabilizing, the great age of dinosaurs was over. But the small ones, especially those that took to the skies, were still present. They became the seeds of new life that would shape the world to come. Their descendants filled the skies with song, their wings carried them to every continent, and their diversity today numbers in the tens of thousands of species. The legacy of survival belongs not to the giants who fell, but to the small creatures who endured. The asteroid impact that ended the age of the dinosaurs around 66 million years ago destroyed almost everything that was large and dominant, but it also allowed certain small and adaptable creatures to find a way forward. Among those survivors were the ancestors of modern birds, the only direct descendants of dinosaurs that still live with us today. To fully understand how birds are the surviving dinosaurs, we must go back into the ancient past, follow their transformation across millions of years, and see how traits such as feathers, light bones, and sharp minds allowed them to continue when so many others fell. Long before the asteroid impact that created a global disaster, some dinosaurs had already begun to change in ways that gave them unexpected advantages. They were not the giant beasts like Tyrannosaurus or Triceratops, but smaller creatures that belonged to the group called theropods. Theropods were two-legged predators, and from this group came famous hunters such as Velociraptor and the enormous Tyrannosaurus rex. Yet not all theropods were built for brute strength and killing power. Some were small, nimble, and curious. They developed feathers, first not for flight but likely for warmth, display, and perhaps to help glide from tree to tree. Over time, these feathers would become one of the most important features in the history of life, for they would be the foundation of bird flight. The earliest creatures that could be called bird-like appeared during the Jurassic period, more than 150 million years ago. The most famous of these is Archaeopteryx, discovered in limestone in Germany. Archaeopteryx had teeth in its mouth, claws on its wings, and a long bony tail, features that make it clearly dinosaur-like. But it also had feathers shaped almost exactly like those of modern birds, showing that it could glide or perhaps even fly short distances. Archaeopteryx stands as a perfect example of evolution in action, a bridge between dinosaurs and birds, not fully one nor the other, but a mixture of both. This mixture tells us that the line dividing birds from dinosaurs is not sharp at all, but rather a long path of gradual changes. As millions of years passed, more bird-like dinosaurs appeared. They were small, light, and diverse. Some lived in trees, others ran on the ground. They had beaks instead of teeth, hollow bones that made them lighter, and stronger flight muscles that let them stay in the air longer. While giant dinosaurs dominated the land, these small feathered creatures filled other niches, living in places where speed, agility, and cleverness mattered more than raw strength. It is easy to imagine them darting through forests, picking insects from bark, or gliding from tree to tree while larger dinosaurs shook the ground below. When the asteroid struck Earth 66 million years ago, the world of dinosaurs changed overnight. Fires burned forests, tsunamis swept across coasts, and thick clouds of dust and ash darkened the sky for months, perhaps even years. Plants could not grow without sunlight, and the food chains collapsed. The great plant-eating dinosaurs starved, and the predators that fed on them followed soon after. Almost all large creatures disappeared, and it seemed as though the age of reptiles had ended forever. But some small dinosaurs survived, and among them were those that would give rise to the birds we know today. Why did these small feathered dinosaurs succeed where so many others perished? The answer lies in their size, their diet, and their adaptability. Small creatures need less food to survive, and many early birds could eat seeds, insects, and other foods that were still available even in the harsh aftermath of the asteroid impact. Seeds, buried in the ground or stored in plants, could remain edible long after leaves and fruits were gone. Insects also survived the disaster more easily than large animals, and birds that could eat them had a steady supply of nourishment. Their ability to fly gave them another advantage, allowing them to escape dangerous places, travel to new areas, and find scattered food sources more effectively than animals that could only walk. Another important survival trait was their fast reproduction. Large dinosaurs took years to grow and needed much food to reach adulthood, but small bird-like dinosaurs could lay eggs, hatch quickly, and grow faster, giving them a chance to increase their numbers even in harsh times. This rapid cycle of life was crucial in a world where survival depended on speed and resilience. After the disaster cleared and life slowly began to recover, these surviving bird-like dinosaurs spread into new environments. With the giants gone, they faced less competition, and they diversified into many different forms. Over millions of years, they became the birds that filled the skies, forests, wetlands, and oceans of our modern world. Every pigeon in a city, every sparrow in a garden, every eagle soaring in the sky, and every penguin sliding across ice is a living descendant of the dinosaurs that endured the greatest extinction event since life began. The thought that the robin singing outside a window or the chicken on a farm shares its ancestry with Velociraptor or Tyrannosaurus rex can be surprising, even difficult to believe. But the evidence is overwhelming. Fossils show clear links between dinosaurs and birds, with shared features such as wishbones, hollow bones, feathers, and similar nesting behaviours. They build nests, lay eggs with hard shells, and some species show courtship displays using feathers much like ancient dinosaurs likely did. Chickens and ostriches have been studied for the claws and bones in their wings, which reveal traits that match ancient theropods more than any modern reptile. One striking piece of evidence lies in the way birds breathe. Unlike mammals, which have lungs that simply expand and contract, birds have a unique system of air sacs that keeps oxygen flowing through their bodies in a constant loop. Fossils of certain dinosaurs show evidence of this same air sac system, meaning the breathing style of modern birds was already present in their ancestors. This system gave them great endurance, supporting flight and activity, and may have helped them endure the thin, dust-choked atmosphere after the asteroid strike. When we look at modern birds, we see a story of success. They number in the tens of billions across Earth and exist in nearly every environment, from the icy poles to the driest deserts. Some soar across continents on migrations that cover thousands of miles, while others live their entire lives in small patches of forest. Their songs fill our days, their bright feathers bring colour to landscapes, and their intelligence allows them to solve problems, use tools, and even communicate in complex ways. All of this springs from their dinosaur heritage. But the story of birds as surviving dinosaurs is not just one of survival, it is also one of transformation. They did not remain exactly as they were at the moment of disaster, but continued to change, adapting to new worlds and opportunities. Flight itself evolved in many forms. Some birds lost the ability to fly, like ostriches and emus, because running was more useful in their open habitats. Penguins turned flight into swimming, their wings reshaped into flippers that let them glide through water as smoothly as any fish. Hawks and eagles perfected the art of soaring on rising air currents, while hummingbirds became masters of hovering. Each of these changes is part of the continuing story that began with small feathered dinosaurs millions of years ago. The connection between birds and dinosaurs also helps us understand evolution in a deeper way. It shows that extinction does not always mean complete disappearance, but can also mean transformation. The dinosaurs we imagine as terrible lizards are not gone entirely. They live on in the flutter of wings, the call of songbirds, and the beating heart of every bird on Earth. Evolution did not erase them, but reshaped them into forms that could thrive in a changed world. In our own lives, we interact with these surviving dinosaurs more than with any other wild animals. We keep them as pets, we farm them for food, and we admire their beauty in nature. Chickens, ducks, and turkeys are part of our daily meals, yet each carries the legacy of ancient creatures that once ruled the earth. Parrots, crows, and ravens amaze us with their intelligence. Even pigeons, often overlooked in cities, are part of this grand story, their wings beating as echoes of a history stretching back over 100 million years. Feathers are among the most remarkable inventions of nature, and their role in survival and adaptation is one of the greatest stories in the history of life on Earth. To truly understand how feathers helped living creatures endure, thrive, and evolve, we must go back to a time when the Earth was very different from today. Millions of years ago, when dinosaurs walked the land and strange flying reptiles ruled the skies, Feathers began as simple, almost hair-like structures. Over time, they transformed into highly complex tools that served purposes far beyond what one might imagine. Feathers became not just a covering, but a source of warmth, a shield against danger, a way of showing off, a tool for flight, and a key to the survival of an entire group of animals that still exist today, the birds. It may sound surprising, but feathers did not first appear for flying. In fact, the earliest feathers were far too simple and far too weak to lift anything into the air. They were thin strands, a bit like soft bristles, that grew out of the skin of some small dinosaurs. Scientists believe that these early feathers may have started as little hollow tubes, something like tiny quills. Their first and most important role was probably to keep the animal warm. Warmth is no small thing in the struggle for survival. The Earth during the age of dinosaurs had many climates, some warm and tropical, others dry, and still others cooler than we might expect. For small dinosaurs, staying warm was a constant challenge. Unlike giant dinosaurs that could rely on their massive size to retain heat, small ones would lose warmth quickly, especially at night. Having a fuzzy coat of primitive feathers would have been like wearing a blanket that trapped body heat, helping them survive cold evenings and chilly mornings. This ability to hold in warmth was more than just comfort. It may have been one of the great turning points in evolution. Warm-blooded animals like mammals and birds are able to keep moving, hunting, and staying active even when the temperature falls. Cold-blooded animals like lizards and snakes must often slow down or hide when it gets cold. A small dinosaur with feathers could keep its body warmer and thus stay alert while its rivals were sluggish. This advantage may have helped feathered dinosaurs hunt for food, escape predators, or explore places that were too cold for other creatures. In this way, something as soft and simple as a feather could mean the difference between life and death. Feathers also had another early role that had nothing to do with warmth or flying. They could be used for display. Even the simplest feathers could have been brightly coloured or arranged in striking patterns. Imagine a small dinosaur flashing its feathered tail to impress a mate or scare away a rival. Bright feathers could signal health, strength, or readiness to breed. Over countless generations, natural selection would have favoured those whose feathers gave them an edge in attracting partners or warding off enemies. In this way, feathers became not only a survival tool, but also a language of beauty and power. They carried messages in colour and form, telling other creatures who was strong, who was weak, and who was ready to pass on their genes. But the story did not end there. Over millions of years, feathers grew more complex. They began to branch into shapes that caught the air, first perhaps by accident, later in more deliberate ways. Some small dinosaurs may have leapt from tree to tree, their feathered arms spreading out like gliders. Others may have run quickly across the ground, their feathered limbs catching the air and giving them lift. Eventually, these experiments with feathers led to the first true powered flight. The wings of birds are nothing more than highly specialised arms covered with long, strong feathers that can catch the air and push against it. Flight is one of the most powerful forms of adaptation ever achieved. It allows an animal to escape predators, travel great distances, search for food in new areas, and find safety high above the ground. Without feathers, none of this would have been possible. Even after flight evolved, feathers continued to serve many other purposes. Not all birds fly, but all birds have feathers. This shows us that feathers were never just about flying. Penguins, for example, cannot soar through the air, but their feathers form a waterproof coat that lets them dive into icy seas without freezing. Ostriches and emus cannot fly either, but their feathers shade them from the harsh sun and provide insulation during cold nights. Peacocks use their magnificent tail feathers not to fly but to display dazzling patterns that attract mates. In each case, feathers adapt to the needs of the creature, becoming tools shaped by survival itself. One of the most interesting roles of feathers is in camouflage. Many birds survive by blending into their surroundings. Their feathers may be coloured like leaves, bark, sand, or snow, making them nearly invisible to predators. Think of a snowy owl sitting quietly in a white landscape, its feathers making it vanish into the frozen world around it. Or picture a bird of the desert whose feathers match the dusty earth, allowing it to hide from hawks above. Camouflage is as much a weapon as claws or teeth, for it prevents danger from ever striking. At the same time, other birds use the opposite strategy, with feathers that stand out boldly in bright reds, blues, or yellows. These warning colours can tell predators that the bird is poisonous, bad tasting, or too dangerous to attack. Feathers also protect against the forces of nature. Rain rolls off many feathers because of special oils that birds spread with their beaks. This waterproofing keeps them dry and light, even in storms. Some feathers are shaped to block wind or to trap a layer of warm air close to the skin, forming a kind of natural coat. Others act as shields during fights or as soft padding for eggs in a nest. Feathers, in this sense, became not just tools for flight or display, but part of a complete survival kit. The importance of feathers becomes even clearer when we consider what happened after the Great Extinction that ended the age of the dinosaurs about 66 million years ago. When the asteroid struck Earth, the skies filled with dust. The ground shook and fires raged across continents. Most large dinosaurs died out, yet one group survived: the small feathered dinosaurs that we now call birds. Their feathers may have helped them stay warm in the dark, cold years that followed the asteroid's impact. Their ability to fly may have allowed them to find food when it was scarce. Their small size and feather-covered bodies may have let them adapt in ways that giant reptiles could not. In short, feathers may have been one of the reasons birds are still with us today, while so many other creatures vanished forever. If we look at the world today, we can see how feathers still play countless roles in survival and adaptation. Migrating birds fly thousands of miles across oceans and continents, their feathers carrying them through storms and winds. Tropical birds show off brilliant feathers in displays that are as much art as they are science, proving health and vigour to potential mates. Arctic birds survive freezing temperatures with thick coats of downy feathers that insulate them better than any human-made material. Desert birds keep cool under light, reflective feathers that bounce away the sun's heat. Everywhere we look, feathers have been shaped by evolution to fit the exact needs of the bird. It is also worth remembering that feathers are not only tools but living parts of the body. They must be cared for, cleaned, and replaced. Birds spend hours each day preening, which means carefully arranging their feathers, spreading oils on them, and removing dirt or parasites. A feather in poor condition could mean the difference between life and death, especially for a bird that relies on flight to escape danger. This constant care shows just how central feathers are to survival. They are not like hair, which can grow endlessly and still serve its purpose. Feathers wear out and must be molted or shed and replaced with new ones. This cycle ensures that birds always have feathers strong enough to do their jobs. The variety of feathers is astonishing. Some are soft and fluffy, built only for warmth. Others are stiff and strong, designed to form the wings and tail. Some are long and decorative, meant to dazzle in courtship displays. Still others are specialized, like the tiny fringes on the wings of owls that make their flight nearly silent. Each type of feather tells a story of adaptation, of how a creature met the challenges of its world and found a way to thrive. Humans too have long admired and made use of feathers. For thousands of years, people have used feathers for clothing, decoration, writing, and even flight. Arrows were fletched with feathers to make them fly straight. Quills cut from feathers became pens that recorded human history. Ceremonial garments from cultures across the world have been adorned with feathers as symbols of status, power, or beauty. Even today, down feathers are used in jackets and bedding because they insulate so well, while the study of feathers has inspired designs in aviation and engineering. The deeper we study feathers, the more we realize that they are among the most perfect examples of nature's ability to create solutions. From their earliest beginnings as simple filaments on small dinosaurs to their present forms in countless bird species, feathers have proven themselves time and again as keys to survival. They are shields, signals, tools, blankets, wings, and works of art all at once. Their adaptability explains not only the success of birds, but also the endurance of life in the face of disaster. If the dinosaurs had never developed feathers, the world might look very different today. There might be no birdsong in the morning, no migrations across the skies, no brilliant flashes of colour in the forest. Feathers made it possible for one branch of the dinosaur family to rise above catastrophe and continue to shape the Earth. They are more than simple coverings. They are a symbol of life's ability to adapt, endure, and find new ways to flourish even in the harshest conditions. After the great asteroid fell from the sky and struck the Earth around 66 million years ago, the world was thrown into darkness and disaster. Forests burned, The air filled with ash, the oceans roared with waves, and the land shook with earthquakes. For the great dinosaurs that had ruled the planet for more than 160 million years, it was a time of fear and collapse. Many of them could not find food, and many more were destroyed quickly by the fires and changes that followed. Yet even in such a grim world, life did not simply end. In the silence and ruins left behind, countless small survivors stirred, and among them were the insects. These tiny creatures, often overlooked, had been around for hundreds of millions of years before the asteroid struck, and they would continue long after. Their bodies were simple yet strong, their habits flexible, and their diets wide. They were not mighty like the dinosaurs, but they were clever in their own way. In the shattered world after the impact, insects found new chances to live, especially in the work of scavenging what had been lost. When the asteroid struck, it killed not only the dinosaurs but also countless plants, smaller animals and sea creatures. The Earth became a place filled with bodies, broken forests and burned remains. This was a tragedy for the large creatures that could no longer find fresh food, but it was an open door for scavengers. Insects had always been skilled in taking advantage of what was left behind. Beetles that fed on dead wood, ants that carried away bits of flesh, flies that laid eggs in rotting remains, and termites that consumed fallen trees. All of these found a vast banquet in the wreckage of the world. Insects are nature's cleaners. They can break down what is dead and return it to the soil, keeping life going in a cycle. After the asteroid, the world was filled with endless work for them. Everywhere they moved, there were fallen leaves, dead plants, charred wood, and animal remains. Large predators like Tyrannosaurus rex had perished, but their bodies did not remain untouched for long. Swarms of insects came to feed, each playing its part. Some gnawed at the flesh, others drank the fluids, and others laid eggs so that their young could continue the work. This might seem grim, but it was essential, for without insects the Earth would have been buried under piles of decay. The darkness after the impact lasted for months and perhaps years. The skies were clouded by dust and soot blocking out sunlight. Plants could not grow easily, and many died. But insects did not need sunlight in the same way as plants. They fed on what was already there. They could thrive in the shadows, crawling, buzzing, and hiding in cracks. In a way, the disaster that brought an end to the dinosaurs gave insects even more food than before. While mighty hunters starved, these small creatures feasted. Take the example of flies. Long before humans ever appeared, flies had mastered the art of laying eggs in decaying bodies. Within hours of a creature's death, flies could find it, guided by smell. They would lay their eggs, and soon larvae, maggots, would hatch. These maggots were like tiny living machines, eating flesh and breaking it down quickly. After the impact, the world was filled with carcasses. Flies must have multiplied greatly, turning the death of the giants into nourishment for their own young. Every fallen dinosaur, from the great Triceratops to the towering sauropods, became an island of life for countless maggots. Beetles too had their moment. Many beetles specialize in eating wood, and after the fires, forests were littered with burned and fallen trees. Termites and wood-boring beetles moved in, breaking down trunks and branches. Others fed on dung or carrion, and with so many animals killed, the Earth provided endless supply. Beetles are tough creatures, able to survive in harsh conditions, and they could shelter underground or beneath bark. This ability helped them through the cold and the darkness while feeding on what remained above. Ants, another group of insects, also gained from this new world. Ants are social, working together in colonies to gather food. They could take small pieces of larger carcasses back to their nests, feeding their queens and larvae. Even if one ant was weak, thousands together could strip remains clean. Their tunnels underground also gave them protection from fire, cold, and predators. When the world above was dangerous, ants kept working quietly below. Cockroaches, often disliked today, were also strong survivors. Their ability to eat almost anything, paper, wood, food scraps, and even glue, meant they were not picky in a ruined world. After the asteroid, they would have crawled through the ruins, chewing whatever they could find. Their flattened bodies let them hide in small cracks, and their eggs were protected in hard cases. All this allowed them to multiply while larger, more delicate creatures perished. The role of scavenging was not only about insects feeding themselves. By eating remains, they also cleared space for new life. Imagine if every dinosaur that died after the impact had remained as a rotting body lying on the ground. Disease and choking decay would have made survival even harder. Instead, insects cleaned the earth. They recycled the dead into soil, which, when the sunlight finally returned, made it possible for plants to grow again. Without insects, the recovery of the earth might have taken much longer. Insects also fed other survivors. Small mammals that lived through the disaster, hiding in burrows or moving in the shadows, needed food. With plants gone, seeds rare, and larger prey too dangerous or absent, many of these mammals turned to insects. Beetles, termites, maggots, and ants became meals for these tiny furry creatures. In this way, the insect boom after the impact may have helped mammals survive and slowly rise to greater importance in the ages that followed. It is not too much to say that without insects keeping life going in the ruins, the path to human beings may never have happened. The cycle of scavenging after the impact can be imagined like a chain. A dinosaur falls, killed by fire, cold, or hunger. Flies arrive first, laying eggs, and soon maggots eat the soft flesh. Beetles come next, gnawing at tougher parts. Ants take away pieces, feeding their colonies. Termites work on fallen trees nearby, while cockroaches crawl around taking leftovers. All the while, the remains are being broken down and turned into nutrients for the soil. Small mammals, birds, and reptiles feed on the insects themselves, adding more links to the chain. Slowly the land clears, and the cycle begins again with the next fallen body. The world of insects is often unseen, but after the asteroid it became one of the main engines keeping Earth alive. Their ability to scavenge, to eat what others leave behind, made them the quiet heroes of survival. The dinosaurs with their teeth and claws could not handle the disaster, but the insects with their tiny jaws and patience did. Even in the oceans, scavenging insects played a role along shorelines and riverbanks. When fish and marine reptiles washed up dead after the impact, insects on the coasts fed on them too. Crustaceans and worms in the sea did similar work, but on land, insects were the leaders of decay. The sheer numbers of insects also gave them an advantage. A single female fly could lay hundreds of eggs. A queen ant could produce thousands of workers. Cockroaches bred quickly, and beetles were equally abundant. This meant that even if many died in the disaster, enough survived to rebuild their numbers fast. In a world where many creatures were struggling just to find one meal, insects multiplied and spread. The asteroid impact showed a truth about survival. Size and power are not always the greatest strengths. Flexibility, numbers, and the ability to live on little can be far more important. Insects had all these qualities. They did not need large territories, they did not need much food at once, and they could hide easily. They were not bound to one diet, but could switch between wood, leaves, flesh, dung, and even other insects. This flexibility let them turn disaster into opportunity. When humans look back at that time, it is easy to focus on the terrible loss of dinosaurs, the giants of the Earth. Yet if we look closer, we see that the real winners of that dark age were often the smallest creatures. The buzzing of flies, the clicking of beetles, the marching of ants, and the scurrying of cockroaches became the sound of survival. They filled the silence left behind by the great roars that had once shaken the forests. Over time, as the skies cleared and sunlight returned, plants began to grow again. The soil, enriched by the work of scavenging insects, gave rise to new forests and grasslands. Insects did not stop scavenging, but they also returned to pollinating flowers and eating leaves. The balance of life shifted once more, but insects remained at the centre. Their work in the shadows had already ensured that life could continue. It is strange to think that the survival of the future, including the rise of mammals and later human beings, depended so much on creatures as small as a fly or an ant. But in the end, that is the truth. Without insects cleaning the world after the asteroid, the land might have been poisoned by rot. Without insects feeding the small survivors, those survivors might never have endured. To understand why freshwater habitats could serve as refuges, we need to imagine the conditions after the asteroid impact. The explosion itself, centered in what is now the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico, released unimaginable energy. Earth shook with earthquakes, volcanoes were triggered, and tsunamis taller than skyscrapers rushed across coastlines. Dust, rock, and molten droplets of glass shot into the sky, blocking sunlight for months or even years. This global darkness stopped photosynthesis on land, leaving forests and grasslands to die back. For dinosaurs that relied on vegetation, this meant starvation, and for the meat-eaters that hunted them, it meant their food supply disappeared too. Yet under the surface of lakes and rivers, plants like algae and hardy water weeds had a better chance of surviving, since some could draw energy from nutrients even in low light. The water also shielded them from the falling ash and kept temperatures more stable than the open air. Dinosaurs, especially the smaller and more adaptable kinds, might have turned to these wetlands as sources of food and shelter. Many riverbanks and floodplains were still rich with decaying matter, insects, and small animals that thrived in the mess left behind by falling forests. For plant-eating dinosaurs, reeds, ferns, and aquatic plants provided something to eat when other food was gone. For meat-eaters, fish and amphibians offered prey when the great herds had vanished. In times of terrible change, the ability to find anything edible could mean the difference between survival and extinction. Freshwater habitats gave at least a temporary lifeline to those who could reach them. The presence of scavenging opportunities in such watery places also mattered. After the asteroid, countless creatures died, and their bodies washed into rivers and lakes. Insects and fish fed on these remains, and then larger animals fed on the insects and fish. This created small chains of life, fragile but real, that continued in the shadow of extinction. Dinosaurs that could hunt or scavenge near water had access to this hidden economy of survival. It was not a comfortable existence, but in desperate times, it allowed life to continue. Another important point about freshwater habitats was the protection they offered from the harsh environment above. On open plains, the air was filled with choking dust, and the ground was scorched by wildfires. But water acted as a shield. Lakes and marshes were cooler and moister, protecting eggs, plants, and smaller animals from complete destruction. Dinosaur nests close to wetlands may have stood a better chance, especially for species that already favoured such environments before the disaster. Crocodiles, turtles, and amphibians survived the extinction, in part because their bodies and eggs were linked to water. Dinosaurs that shared these environments may have gained similar advantages, at least for a time. The fossil record itself gives hints that wetlands were among the last places dinosaurs held out. In several regions of North America and Asia, the youngest dinosaur fossils are found in sediments laid down by rivers and lakes. This suggests that long after the asteroid, while forests and drylands were nearly empty, some dinosaurs were still living near the water. They may have been smaller herbivores eating water plants, or predators following fish and amphibians. These fossils are like echoes of the final days of their reign, showing that water kept life going even as the land became a wasteland. Imagine a scene during those dark years after the impact. A once lush plain is now grey and barren, the trees burned down and the sky covered in ash. But along a winding river, life stirs. The water is murky but still flows. On the edges, ferns sprout from the damp soil and reeds rise above the surface. In the shallows, fish gulp at the surface for air while insects buzz weakly. A small dinosaur, feathered and agile, creeps along the bank searching for food. It catches a fish with a quick snap of its jaws. Further downstream, the carcass of a larger animal has washed into the water, where scavenging creatures tear at its remains. This is no paradise, but compared to the empty dry plains, it is a refuge, a chance to survive one more day. Freshwater habitats also played a role in connecting surviving species. Rivers run through landscapes and join distant regions, so creatures using them as shelters could spread slowly, moving from one patch of life to another. In a world where most land was silent and dead, these watery corridors may have served as the last lifelines of ecosystems. They linked populations of fish, insects, amphibians, and possibly the last dinosaurs, helping them hold on until conditions slowly improved. It is also important to remember that not all dinosaurs were giant beasts roaming dry ground. Many were smaller, lighter, and more adaptable. Some had features that made them well suited to wet environments, such as broad feet for walking in mud or long necks for reaching water plants. These creatures would have been more likely to use rivers and lakes as homes. Their size meant they needed less food, and their adaptability allowed them to eat whatever they could find. The same qualities that helped them in life may have given them a slightly better chance after disaster struck. However, it must be said that even freshwater refugees could not protect dinosaurs forever. The global changes were simply too severe and too long-lasting. As the years passed, even the lakes and rivers could not provide enough to sustain large populations. Most species eventually disappeared, unable to cope with the cold, the hunger, and the poisoned environment. Only a small branch of feathered dinosaurs, the ones we now call birds, managed to survive and thrive, but in the critical first years after the asteroid, these freshwater habitats were likely among the very last strongholds of their ancient relatives. The idea that rivers and lakes offered safe havens also fits with what we know about other survivors. Crocodiles, for example, had lived alongside dinosaurs for millions of years and endured the extinction. They were strongly tied to water, could eat almost anything, and could go without food for long periods. Turtles and amphibians, also linked to wetlands, made it through as well. Fish and many invertebrates continued their cycles underwater. These examples show how powerful water environments were as refuges, and dinosaurs sharing those environments would have gained the same benefits, at least for a time. Mammals rising as dinosaurs declined is one of the most fascinating chapters in the long history of life on Earth. A story filled with struggle, survival, chance, and eventual triumph. To truly understand it, we must step back to a time when dinosaurs still walked the land, when they ruled the continents for more than 160 million years, and when mammals were small, quiet creatures scurrying in the shadows of giants. For much of this long period, mammals were present but insignificant in terms of size, power, or influence. Yet as the age of dinosaurs drew closer to its end, the stage was being quietly set for mammals to rise, adapt, and eventually dominate the world in ways that were unimaginable when tyrannosaurs and long-necked sauropods roamed freely. This transition was not sudden, nor was it a simple matter of one group falling and another instantly rising. Instead, it was a complex process spread over millions of years, shaped by chance events like the asteroid impact, by environmental change, and by the remarkable abilities of mammals themselves to adapt, survive, and diversify. When we imagine the late Cretaceous world, about 66 million years ago, we picture massive dinosaurs like Triceratops with its great horns, Tyrannosaurus with its fearsome jaws, and herds of duck-billed hadrosaurs moving through forests of towering ferns and flowering plants. In that same world, mammals were there, but they looked very different from the large creatures we know today. Most were tiny, about the size of mice, shrews, or small rats, and they lived secretive lives under the cover of night. Their small size limited them in many ways, but it also gave them special advantages. While large dinosaurs needed enormous amounts of food, small mammals required far less. While dinosaurs dominated the daylight hours, mammals found safety in being nocturnal, active when the predators slept. This way of living shaped their senses, giving them sharp hearing, keen noses, and in some cases even the ability to sense warmth in the darkness. For tens of millions of years, mammals stayed small and relatively unnoticed. They did not directly compete with dinosaurs for dominance. Instead, they carved out niches in the environment where they could survive without drawing too much attention. Some specialized in eating insects, others in nibbling seeds or small plants, and still others in hunting tiny reptiles. It was a quiet existence, but one that kept them alive through long ages. In this way, they survived great environmental changes and the rise and fall of different groups of dinosaurs, but their great turning point would come at the end of the Cretaceous, when disaster struck in the form of a massive asteroid impact near the present-day Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. When that asteroid, more than 6 miles wide, slammed into Earth, the world changed in a matter of hours. The skies filled with fire, shockwaves spread across continents, and tsunamis rolled across ancient seas. Yet those were only the beginning. In the following months and years, vast amounts of dust and ash blocked sunlight, plunging Earth into what scientists call an impact winter. Temperatures dropped, photosynthesis collapsed, plants withered, and ecosystems broke apart. For the large dinosaurs who needed huge amounts of food to survive, this was a death sentence. Many starved, others froze. Entire ecosystems that had supported them for millions of years collapsed almost overnight. By the time the dust cleared and the skies brightened again, non-avian dinosaurs had vanished from the Earth, their time as rulers of the land finally at an end. But for mammals, this global disaster was strangely an opportunity. Their small size, which had once seemed like a limitation, now became their greatest advantage. Because they needed less food, they were more likely to find enough to survive in a world where resources were scarce. Their ability to eat many different types of food, whether insects, seeds, roots, or carrion, gave them flexibility when the usual supplies of plants and prey collapsed. Their underground burrows protected them from the worst of the heat and firestorms immediately after the impact, and their nocturnal habits meant they were already used to living in darkness, which now covered Earth for years. It is worth pausing here to imagine what this moment must have felt like for life on Earth. For over 160 million years, dinosaurs had seemed unstoppable. From the towering Brachiosaurus that stretched its neck toward the treetops, to the swift raptors that hunted in packs, to the armored ankylosaurs covered in plates of bone, dinosaurs had filled every corner of the planet. Mammals, in contrast, had been little more than side characters in this grand play, and yet, when catastrophe came, it was the giants who fell and the small survivors who endured. This reversal of fortune is one of the most dramatic in all of natural history. In the first few 100,000 years after the asteroid strike, mammals began to take on new roles in the empty world left behind. With the great dinosaurs gone, many ecological niches were suddenly open. Forest floors, once dominated by herds of hadrosaurs, were now empty. The skies, once filled with flying reptiles like pterosaurs, were quieter. Even rivers and lakes, once hunted by large predators, were safer than before. Mammals began to explore these spaces, adapting and evolving quickly to take advantage of the opportunities. At first, mammals remained relatively small. The world was still unstable, and it took time for forests and food chains to recover. But once stability returned, mammals began to diversify in astonishing ways. Some species grew larger, taking on roles that dinosaurs had once held. Within a few million years, mammals the size of dogs, pigs, and even bears had appeared. These larger forms were possible because food sources became more abundant again as plant life returned. Herbivorous mammals grew bigger to feed on the new forests of flowering plants, while carnivorous mammals evolved to hunt them. This was the beginning of a new age, often called the Age of Mammals, which would eventually lead to the rich diversity we see today. One of the keys to the success of mammals was their adaptability. Unlike reptiles, mammals were warm-blooded, meaning they could generate and regulate their own body heat. This allowed them to remain active in cooler climates and in times of environmental stress. They also had fur, which provided insulation and protection. In addition, mammals had complex teeth that could chew food in different ways. Where many reptiles simply swallowed food whole, mammals could grind, slice, and crush it, allowing them to eat a wider variety of things. This flexibility made it possible for mammals to survive when conditions were harsh and to thrive when opportunities arose. Another advantage was reproduction. Mammals invested heavily in their young compared to reptiles. They gave birth to live offspring rather than laying eggs that were vulnerable to predators and environmental dangers. They also fed their young with milk, a unique adaptation that gave newborns a greater chance of survival during their early, vulnerable days. This meant that even in tough times, mammals could raise small numbers of offspring with better chances of survival, rather than relying on producing huge numbers of eggs in the hope that a few would live. Over millions of years, these qualities allowed mammals to diversify into an incredible range of forms. Some returned to the water and evolved into whales and dolphins. Others took to the skies and became bats. Still others spread across the land, developing into everything from elephants to primates. This diversity was possible because mammals had survived the crisis of the asteroid impact, and because they were able to exploit the empty spaces left behind by the dinosaurs. It is also important to recognize that not all dinosaurs vanished. Birds, which are the living descendants of small feathered dinosaurs, survived the catastrophe. They too benefited from small size, adaptability, and flexibility in diet. In this sense, the modern world is not simply the age of mammals, but a shared age of mammals and birds, both of which rose from the ashes of the Great Extinction. Yet it was mammals that would eventually dominate the largest and most influential roles on land, shaping ecosystems and giving rise in the distant future to humanity itself. Imagine walking through the world about 10 million years after the asteroid. The land is now filled with strange creatures, many of them unfamiliar yet clearly mammalian. Giant, cow-sized herbivores browse in the forests, while predators the size of wolves stalk them. In open plains, herds of early hoofed mammals graze on grasses that were just beginning to spread widely. Strange, saber-toothed predators develop, foreshadowing the fearsome cats of later ages. Monkeys and early primates climb in the trees, beginning a journey that will eventually lead to humans. The world is no longer ruled by dinosaurs, but by the descendants of those once small, overlooked survivors who scurried in the shadows millions of years before. The rise of mammals also changed the very structure of ecosystems. Dinosaurs had dominated by sheer size and power, but mammals brought something new: complexity. With their ability to adapt in so many directions, mammals created webs of relationships that were richer and more varied than before. They became grazers, browsers, burrowers, climbers, swimmers, and flyers. Each new form interacted with plants, insects, and other animals in unique ways, creating ecosystems that were more intricate and balanced. In this sense, the rise of mammals was not just about replacing dinosaurs, but about building a new kind of world altogether. It is humbling to consider that if the asteroid had never struck, the age of dinosaurs might have continued, and mammals may have remained small and insignificant forever. There may never have been elephants, whales, or primates. There may never have been humans to look back and tell this story. The rise of mammals was not inevitable. It was the result of chance, of disaster, and of remarkable survival skills that allowed them to take advantage of the moment when the giants fell. Even today, echoes of that ancient turning point remain. We live in a world shaped by mammals, from the smallest mouse to the largest blue whale. We ourselves are mammals, the product of that long evolutionary journey that began when our tiny ancestors endured the darkness after the asteroid. Every time we see a squirrel scamper, a cat stretch in the sun, or a child drink milk, we are seeing living reminders of the traits that helped mammals rise while dinosaurs declined. Here is a long and detailed narrative in more than 3,500 words, written in simple and flowing language, with all numbers and dates spelled out in words, without subtopics, and made as elaborate and engaging as possible. When the great catastrophe struck the Earth at the end of the Cretaceous period, it was not only the mighty dinosaurs that faced the fury of the planet's changing face. An asteroid larger than any mountain crashed into the world about 66 million years ago, shaking the ground, boiling the seas, and darkening the skies with smoke and dust. Fires raged across vast lands, giant waves swallowed coastlines, and for months upon months sunlight could not break through the thick veil of soot in the atmosphere. The food chains collapsed, forests withered, and the giants of the land, the dinosaurs who had ruled for more than 160 million years, vanished from dominance. Yet, not every creature was lost in this immense disaster. Among the survivors were some of the most ancient and resilient animals, creatures whose bodies and ways of life had been shaped long before the age of dinosaurs, and who would continue to live long after. These were the reptiles and amphibians that endured the catastrophe. It is almost impossible to imagine the scene right after the impact. The asteroid came crashing down with the energy of billions of atomic bombs, and the shockwave it produced could travel around the world. Animals that lived close to the impact site had little to no chance of survival. Those that endured were often the ones that lived hidden lives, underwater, in the mud, beneath stones, or inside burrows. Amphibians and reptiles were masters of such secret existences. While dinosaurs stood tall and relied on plants and prey that were suddenly taken away, these smaller and quieter animals had strategies that let them withstand famine, cold, and chaos. Among the amphibians, frogs and salamanders were especially fortunate. These creatures had existed long before the asteroid fell, with ancestors reaching back more than 200 million years into the Triassic Age. Frogs, with their simple but effective bodies, could lay thousands of eggs at once in freshwater ponds and streams. When many of those eggs died, enough still survived to carry on the species. Their tadpoles fed on tiny plants, algae, and detritus in the water, resources that often remained available even when forests and grasslands were destroyed. When adult frogs found no insects to eat on land, many could retreat into water bodies and wait. Some could even hibernate by burying themselves in the mud, lowering their heartbeat to almost nothing, and staying that way until conditions improved. This incredible ability to pause life for months or even years allowed frogs to pass through the darkest days of the Earth without vanishing. Salamanders, with their slender bodies and hidden lifestyles, also weathered the storm. Many salamanders spend much of their lives in moist soil, under logs, or within caves. They need little food to survive and can go long periods without moving. Some species can regenerate lost limbs, an ability that might have given them an edge in a dangerous world full of hazards. While the skies were black and ash fell like snow, salamanders waited quietly, using the dampness of their shelters to protect themselves from fire and drought. Unlike the dinosaurs that needed wide open spaces and constant supplies of food, salamanders could live unnoticed in the corners of the earth, and this very smallness saved them. Reptiles, too, had their champions of survival. The most famous are the turtles, creatures that seem almost unchanged from those ancient days. Turtles had already existed for more than 200 million years by the time the asteroid came. Their bodies are like living shields, with shells that protect them from many dangers. But their survival was not only due to armor. Turtles are also champions of patience. They can slow their bodies so much that some species can live for months without food, or even without air when submerged in cold water. When the asteroid blocked out sunlight and temperatures plunged, turtles hid in lakes, rivers, and seas. Covered by mud or resting at the bottoms of waters, they could breathe slowly through their skin or cloacal linings, surviving where many other creatures suffocated or starved. The world may have been burning above them, but in the water turtles endured, waiting for the earth to recover. Crocodilians, the ancient cousins of crocodiles and alligators, also made it through. These reptiles were already fierce predators before the dinosaurs disappeared, and yet it was not their strength that saved them, but their adaptability. Crocodilians are ambush hunters that can live off very little food for a long time. A crocodile can survive for months without eating, relying on stored fat and slow metabolisms. They spend much of their time floating motionless in rivers or swamps, waiting for prey to come near. During the catastrophe, when prey became scarce, they were able to stretch their energy reserves and eat whatever came their way, whether fish, carrion, or even small reptiles and mammals. Like turtles, crocodilians also benefited from living in water, which shielded them from firestorms and gave them a refuge during the cold darkness. Their survival shows that being patient, slow, and opportunistic can sometimes be more powerful than being large and fast. Snakes, too, are among the remarkable survivors. These legless reptiles had already spread across the earth by the late Cretaceous. Snakes are masters of swallowing prey whole and then resting for weeks or months to digest. In times of famine, they can go into long periods of inactivity. Many live underground or in crevices, places that offered protection during the worst days after the asteroid's impact. Fossil records suggest that snakes diversified rapidly after the dinosaurs were gone, taking advantage of empty niches. The decline of large reptiles and the disappearance of many predators gave snakes room to spread and evolve into the thousands of species that exist today. What allowed them to endure the catastrophe was not only their flexible diet, but also their ability to hide, to live silently and patiently until opportunities arose again. Lizards, though less discussed, were also survivors. Some small lizards can eat insects, plants, or anything they can catch. Their small size means they need less energy, and many can escape danger by slipping into cracks or burrows. During the global winter, when plants stopped growing and insects became scarce, lizards faced hardship. Yet, their high reproduction rate and ability to live in small niches helped them persist. Some could survive by eating carrion or scavenging what remained of the dying world. Others, like geckos, could cling to walls and ceilings, avoiding dangers that roam the ground. These strategies allowed lizards to make it through the disaster, though many species surely vanished as well. One cannot forget the role of ecosystems in this story. While dinosaurs relied heavily on green forests and vast fields of plants, many reptiles and amphibians were tied to freshwater habitats, ponds, rivers, lakes, and wetlands. These places, though also damaged by the catastrophe, remained refuges of life. Water could shield against fire, regulate temperatures, and provide algae or detritus when larger food chains collapsed. Amphibians laid eggs in water, reptiles hunted in rivers or buried themselves in muddy bottoms, and even snakes and lizards found safety in the moisture of wetlands. These habitats became havens of survival, when dry lands turned to deserts of ash. It is also worth noting that the bodies of reptiles and amphibians themselves were adapted for such harsh times. Dinosaurs, being warm-blooded or at least partly warm-blooded, needed constant supplies of food to fuel their energy-hungry bodies. Reptiles and amphibians, however, are cold-blooded. Their body temperature depends on their environment, and they need far less energy to survive. This trait became their greatest advantage. In a world where food was scarce and energy was precious, cold-blooded creatures could outlast the warm-blooded giants. While a dinosaur might starve within days or weeks, a turtle, snake, or crocodile could endure for months with little or nothing. Imagine a scene after the impact. Forests turned to charcoal, rivers clogged with fallen ash, and dead animals lying across the land. A giant dinosaur, too weak to hunt or find plants, collapses to the ground. Yet, not far away, in a muddy pond, a turtle lies buried, heartbeat slow, waiting for the world to calm. A crocodile floats silently in the water, conserving energy, ready to snatch any fish or small creature that stirs. A snake slithers into a crevice, curling tightly, lowering its body's needs to almost nothing. A frog burrows into damp soil, sealed away until rain returns. These are the scenes of survival, not glorious battles or heroic struggles, but patience, silence, and the art of waiting. Over time, as the skies cleared and plants began to grow again, these survivors emerged. Frogs sang their calls once more in wetlands, turtles crawled onto banks to bask in the sun, snakes hunted among the grass, and crocodilians ruled the rivers. They had not only endured but also prepared the way for the new world. With the dinosaurs gone, new ecological spaces opened. Reptiles and amphibians, though not as dominant as before, continued their ancient existence, adapting to new climates and environments. They did not need to replace the dinosaurs, for mammals would soon rise into that role. Instead, they kept their place as quiet but enduring witnesses of Earth's story. The survival of these creatures teaches us something profound about life. Strength and size are not always the keys to survival. Sometimes it is flexibility, patience, and the ability to hide and wait that make the difference. Dinosaurs were rulers of their time, but when the world changed too suddenly, their greatness became their weakness. Reptiles and amphibians, creatures of shadows and waters, carried ancient wisdom written in their bodies, wisdom that let them pass through the darkest chapter of Earth's history. In the millions of years that followed, these survivors spread and evolved. Frogs and salamanders diversified into countless species that filled ponds, forests, and mountains. Turtles continued their slow march across time, some living in rivers, others in oceans, their shells still protecting them as they had during the catastrophe. Crocodiles and alligators grew into the powerful hunters we know today, descendants of those that had once hidden in the shadows of dinosaurs. Snakes multiplied and evolved into every shape and size, from tiny blind snakes that burrow in soil to giant pythons that can swallow deer whole. Lizards adapted to deserts, jungles, and even cities. All of them are living reminders of the day when the world nearly ended, and yet life found a way forward. Life on Earth has always been deeply connected to the balance of its ecosystems. When that balance is broken by a great catastrophe, it can take an incredibly long time for the world to return to a state of stability. The recovery of ecosystems after the extinction of the dinosaurs is one of the most fascinating chapters in Earth's history because it shows the incredible resilience of life. After the asteroid impact, the world was left in ruins. Plants had withered due to the lack of sunlight, the food chains had collapsed, and the great dinosaurs that once ruled the land were gone forever. In those early years after the disaster, the planet was quiet, barren, and strange. But gradually, very slowly, life began to creep back. Insects crawled out from the soil, small mammals scurried about searching for seeds and insects to eat, and some plants adapted to grow quickly, even with very little sunlight. Over long stretches of time, these tiny sparks of life formed the foundation for entirely new ecosystems. At first, the recovery was patchy and uneven. In some places, like near rivers and wetlands, life returned more quickly because water helped plants and small creatures survive even in difficult conditions. In other regions that were dry and harsh, it took much longer for ecosystems to form again. It is important to remember that an ecosystem is not just a collection of creatures living side by side. It is a complex network where plants provide food and shelter, herbivores graze on plants, predators hunt herbivores, and scavengers recycle the remains of the dead back into the soil. For such a system to work again after the catastrophe, all its pieces had to return one by one, and they had to find balance with one another. This delicate rebuilding did not happen in years or centuries, it unfolded over millions of years. In the earlier stages, plants were the key players. Without plants, there could be no herbivores, and without herbivores, there could be no predators. After the asteroid impact, many forests were destroyed by firestorms, and the sudden cooling that followed kept new forests from forming for a long while. Instead, the first plants to return were hardy species that could survive with little soil and in poor light, such as ferns and small shrubs. These were like pioneers, the first green soldiers pushing back against the darkness and cold. Once these plants spread across the landscape, they provided both shelter and food for insects and small animals. This slow return of greenery marked the first steps toward the recovery of ecosystems. With time, as the skies cleared and sunlight returned in greater strength, forests began to grow again. At first, they were not the vast jungles or dense woodlands we might imagine, but more scattered patches of trees. Still, even scattered trees could host insects, birds, and small mammals. Insects were especially important during this stage, for they pollinated plants, broke down dead matter, and became a vital source of food for other creatures. It is no exaggeration to say that without insects, the recovery of life on Earth after the asteroid strike might have taken even longer, or perhaps followed a very different path altogether. The oceans also went through a similar slow process of healing. The impact had triggered massive tsunamis, acid rain, and a disruption of marine food chains. Many marine reptiles which had once dominated the seas vanished completely. Plankton, which forms the base of the ocean's food chain, suffered a terrible blow when sunlight was blocked from reaching the waters, but eventually as the atmosphere cleared, plankton populations began to recover. Once plankton thrived again, small fish had food to eat, and then larger predators returned to hunt the small fish. Coral reefs, which had been badly damaged, also began to regrow, although this was one of the slowest processes of all. Coral reefs can take thousands upon thousands of years to rebuild, and in this case their recovery stretched into millions. But with their return, the oceans once again became vibrant with life. On land, the story of recovery was shaped by mammals. While dinosaurs had been the giants of the Mesozoic era, mammals were small and unremarkable during that time. But their very smallness turned out to be their strength in the New World after the extinction. Mammals could hide in burrows, eat a variety of foods, and reproduce more quickly than giant reptiles. As ecosystems recovered, mammals began to expand into new roles. Some became hunters, others grazers, and still others adapted to life in trees. This slow spread of mammals into different habitats eventually set the stage for the rise of primates, and much later, humans themselves. But in those first few million years after the asteroid, the mammals were still small and modest. They were simply survivors taking advantage of the opportunities left behind by the vanished dinosaurs. The recovery of ecosystems was not a smooth climb upward. It was full of setbacks, pauses, and new challenges. Volcanic activity still rumbled in parts of the world, shaping climates and landscapes. Shifts in sea levels drowned some coastlines while exposing others. Each of these changes forced ecosystems to adjust, and sometimes they collapsed again before regrowing. Scientists studying the fossils of this period see a pattern not of quick recovery, but of stepwise progress. There were bursts of new life, followed by setbacks, then bursts again. Over millions of years, however, the general trend was one of steady growth, like a forest slowly thickening after being burned down. One of the remarkable things about this long recovery is the way that entirely new ecosystems emerged, very different from those of the age of the dinosaurs. Before the asteroid, giant reptiles like sauropods and hadrosaurs were the main grazers, feeding on vast forests of conifers and cycads. Afterward, those creatures were gone, and mammals gradually took their place. Instead of thunderous herds of dinosaurs, the world began to see herds of early ungulates, mammals with hooves that grazed on flowering plants. Those flowering plants themselves, which had already begun to spread in the late age of dinosaurs, now had the chance to flourish without being constantly eaten by giant herbivores. Grasslands began to appear, something that had been rare before, and these new grass-filled ecosystems supported an entirely different kind of life. Birds, too, played a vital role in the rebuilding of ecosystems. As the only surviving dinosaurs, birds carried forward a link to the ancient world. Many early birds were small and insect-eating, but over time they diversified. Some became fish hunters, others fruit eaters, and still others seed spreaders. By eating fruits and dropping seeds far from where they had fed, birds helped forests regrow in new places. Their flight allowed them to spread life across great distances, making them messengers of recovery in the devastated world. The pace of ecosystem recovery also shows us how fragile and interconnected life truly is. For example, in some fossil sites, scientists see that it took almost 1 million years before large animals returned in significant numbers after the asteroid. In others, they see that complex forests did not appear until 2 or even 3 million years later. When we speak of millions of years, it's hard to imagine because human lifetimes are so short in comparison. But for Earth, these timescales are normal. Life rebuilds patiently, step by step, until balance is restored. As ecosystems recovered, evolution began to work its magic in new ways. With the dinosaurs gone, many ecological roles were empty. Mammals, birds, and reptiles that survived began to evolve into new forms to fill those roles. Some mammals grew larger to become the grazers of open lands. Others evolved sharp teeth and claws to take the place of predators. Birds too grew into many forms, from small hummingbirds to mighty flightless birds that dominated certain regions. Evolution is like an artist that paints new creatures onto the canvas of life, but it can only do so if the canvas, the ecosystem, is ready to support them. The slow rebuilding of ecosystems after the extinction gave evolution the chance to create new shapes and patterns of life. One of the most fascinating parts of this story is how long it took before ecosystems reached the same level of richness they had before the asteroid. Scientists believe that it may have taken as long as 10 million years before global biodiversity, the total variety of living things, fully recovered. That means that for nearly 10 million years the Earth was living in the shadow of the Great Extinction, slowly crawling back toward abundance. But eventually the world did recover, and in some ways it became even more diverse than before. The age of mammals and birds that followed gave rise to countless new species, from giant mammoths to swift cheetahs, from parrots to penguins, and of course, eventually to human beings. Over a very long span of time, stretching across tens of millions of years, one of the most remarkable transformations in the history of life took place. This transformation was the evolution of birds into the thousands of species that we see today, filling the skies, forests, deserts, and even oceans of the world. Birds did not appear in their current forms overnight. Their journey was slow, complicated, and filled with both struggle and innovation. To understand the vast diversity of birds today, from hummingbirds that can hover like helicopters to massive flightless ostriches running across open plains, we must look back to their origins among ancient dinosaurs and follow the winding path of their survival, adaptation, and eventual explosion into an incredible variety of forms. This story is not simply about wings and feathers, it is about resilience, change, and the endless creativity of evolution. The ancestors of modern birds lived during the age of dinosaurs, a time that began more than 200 million years ago. Among the giant reptiles of the Triassic and Jurassic periods, a group of small feathered dinosaurs began to experiment with new ways of life. These early creatures, which looked more like feathered reptiles than the sparrows outside our windows today, were the first steps toward what we now call birds. One of the earliest and most famous of these was Archaeopteryx, a creature that lived about 150 million years ago. It had feathers like modern birds but also teeth, claws on its wings, and a long bony tail like a reptile. Archaeopteryx could glide and perhaps manage short bursts of flight, though it was not as skilled in the air as the birds we know. Yet, it represented a bridge between two worlds, the reptilian dinosaurs and the future world of birds. Feathers themselves had not originally evolved for flight. Evidence from fossils shows that even dinosaurs that could not fly had feathers or feather-like coverings. These structures may have helped with keeping warm, attracting mates with bright displays, or even hiding from predators by blending into their surroundings. Over time, feathers changed, becoming lighter and more specialized, and eventually, some dinosaurs discovered that they could also be used to glide or fly. This change marked the beginning of a new way of living, moving through the air rather than just walking the ground. The end of the age of dinosaurs about 66 million years ago brought a catastrophe that changed life on Earth forever. A massive asteroid struck the planet, causing fires, earthquakes, giant waves, and finally a long dark period of cooling known as an impact winter. Most of the large dinosaurs perished during this disaster, but some small bird-like dinosaurs managed to endure. Their small size, ability to eat seeds, insects, and other varied foods, and perhaps their ability to fly to safer places gave them an advantage. These survivors were the ancestors of all modern birds. From that narrow escape, the long story of bird evolution entered a new chapter. When the age of dinosaurs ended, many ecological spaces were left empty. With the great reptiles gone, new opportunities opened up for the creatures that survived, including the small feathered birds. They began to spread across the world, experimenting with new ways of life. Over millions of years, they evolved into different forms depending on their surroundings. Some became strong flyers that could travel long distances. Others grew large and heavy, giving up flight to live on the ground. Some developed long bills to sip nectar from flowers, while others grew sharp beaks for cracking nuts or tearing meat. Little by little, birds became one of the most adaptable and varied groups of animals on the planet. One of the most important tools in this transformation was the beak. Unlike mammals, birds do not have teeth. Instead, they developed beaks of all shapes and sizes, each one finely tuned for a certain task. The beak of a hummingbird is long and thin, perfect for drinking nectar deep inside flowers. The beak of a woodpecker is strong and sharp, able to drill into wood to find insects. The beak of a parrot is curved and powerful, excellent for cracking seeds and nuts. Hawks and eagles developed hooked beaks to tear apart prey, while ducks have broad, flat beaks for filtering food from water. The diversity of beaks alone shows how birds evolved to fill countless roles in nature. Another important feature in their success was their wings. Not all wings are the same, and different kinds of wings allow birds to live in different ways. Some wings are long and narrow, made for soaring in the air for hours with very little effort, as seen in albatrosses that can glide over the oceans for thousands of kilometers. Other wings are short and rounded, designed for quick bursts of speed and sharp turns, as seen in pigeons and sparrows that dart through city streets and forests. Hummingbirds have wings that can rotate in a way that allows them to hover, something no other birds can do so well. This variety in wing shapes allowed birds to conquer the skies in unique ways. As the ages passed, birds spread into every corner of the earth. They learned to survive in deserts, rainforests, frozen tundras, and open oceans. Penguins, for example, took a path away from flight, using their wings as flippers to swim underwater, becoming expert divers that can chase fish in icy seas. Ostriches and emus grew tall and powerful, using their long legs to run instead of wings to fly. In the Arctic, snowy owls adapted to blend into snowy landscapes, while in tropical regions, bright parrots and toucans used their colours to stand out in dense forests. Birds found ways to fit into nearly every ecosystem, and their bodies changed to match these environments. The song of birds also became an important part of their evolution. Birdsong is not only beautiful to our ears, but also crucial for their survival. Males sing to attract mates, and many species use calls to defend their territory or warn others of danger. Over time, these songs became more complex and diverse. Nightingales, lyrebirds, and mockingbirds developed astonishing ability to produce elaborate melodies and even mimic sounds from other animals or the environment. This musical side of birds shows how evolution did not only shape their bodies, but also their behaviors and communication. Flight itself is one of the greatest marvels of bird evolution. Achieving flight required more than just feathers. Birds developed hollow bones to make their bodies lighter. Their muscles became powerful enough to beat wings quickly, and their lungs became highly efficient at delivering oxygen. All of these changes together made flight possible and allowed birds to move across vast distances, colonize islands, and escape predators. Migration is one of the most impressive results of this ability. Some birds, like the Arctic tern, travel from the northern polar regions to the southern polar regions and back again every year, covering tens of thousands of kilometers. Such journeys show how the gift of flight opened almost the entire world to them. The explosion of bird diversity after the extinction of the dinosaurs was one of the most rapid in evolutionary history. Scientists believe that within a few million years after the great asteroid impact, birds had already spread into many forms, a process known as adaptive radiation. Each environment offered new challenges and opportunities, and birds evolved quickly to meet them. In forests, some became specialized fruit eaters, spreading seeds as they traveled. In grasslands, others became hunters of insects. Near lakes and rivers, water birds developed long legs and necks for wading. This diversity grew until today there are more than 10,000 known species of birds, making them one of the most varied groups of vertebrates on Earth. The connection between birds and their dinosaur ancestors can still be seen if we look closely. Chickens, pigeons, and even sparrows all carry the legacy of ancient dinosaurs in their bones, feathers, and behavior. When we watch a bird scratch the ground with its claws, or see the sharp gaze of a hawk, we are seeing traces of the age when their ancestors ruled the Earth. Feathers, flight, and even nesting behaviors are all parts of this deep history. Humans have always been fascinated by birds. Their ability to fly made them symbols of freedom and mystery. Ancient cultures often linked birds to the gods or to the soul. People studied their migrations, watched their courtship dances, and admired their songs. In more recent times, scientists began to study birds closely to understand evolution itself. Charles Darwin, for instance, noticed the differences in finches on the Galapagos Islands, where each species had a different beak shape suited to its diet. These observations became part of his theory of natural selection, one of the foundations of modern biology. The story of bird evolution is still unfolding. Scientists continue to discover new fossils that fill in the missing pieces of their history. Ancient bird relatives, some with teeth and clawed fingers, show us the stages of their transformation. Modern genetic studies reveal how birds are related to each other and how they spread across the globe. Every discovery adds more detail to the great picture of how birds came to be. But their journey is not finished. Birds today face new challenges created by human activity. Habitat loss, climate change, and pollution threaten many species. Just as they survived the great extinction that ended the age of dinosaurs, birds must now adapt once again to a changing world. Their future depends on whether they can continue to evolve, and whether humans can learn to protect the natural environments that they depend on. The disappearance of iconic groups like Tyrannosaurus rex and Triceratops is one of the most fascinating and haunting moments in the entire history of life on Earth. For millions of years, these animals had walked the land as rulers, shaping the ecosystems around them and leaving behind fossils that still capture the imagination of people across the world today. Their sudden vanishing marks not only the end of their reign, but also the close of an era known as the Age of Dinosaurs, which had lasted for more than 160 million years. To truly understand the disappearance of these mighty creatures, one must journey back to the final chapter of the Cretaceous period, about 66 million years ago, when the Earth itself was shaken by events so catastrophic that almost 3/4 of all species living at that time were wiped out forever. Tyrannosaurus rex, often simply called T-Rex, has become a symbol of power, strength, and fear in the minds of people. This animal was one of the largest carnivorous dinosaurs ever to live, reaching lengths of up to 40 feet, standing nearly 20 feet tall, and weighing more than 7 tons. Its skull was massive, with teeth the size of bananas that could crush bone with a single bite. T-Rex was not only strong but also intelligent for a dinosaur, with forward-facing eyes that gave it depth perception and a sense of smell so sharp that it could track prey from miles away. This fearsome predator dominated the lands of what is now North America during the last few million years before the Great Extinction. Triceratops, by contrast, was a giant plant eater, but no less impressive. It had a huge body, 4 sturdy legs, and most famously 3 sharp horns on its face. 2 long ones above the eyes and 1 shorter one on the nose gave it both defense and an intimidating look. Behind its head stretched a large bony frill, decorated with spikes and openings, which may have been used to protect its neck from predators like T-Rex, or to attract mates, or even to intimidate rivals. Triceratops could grow up to 30 feet in length and weigh as much as 10 tons. Despite its plant-eating lifestyle, it was far from harmless. With its horns and strong build, it could challenge predators and even injure them fatally. For millions of years, creatures like Triceratops roamed the plains, feeding on the abundant vegetation and shaping the plant life of their environment. Both of these dinosaurs represent two sides of the ancient struggle for survival: the hunter and the defender, predator and prey. For countless generations, they had adapted to life's challenges and thrived in a world filled with danger and change. Yet despite all their strengths, they could not survive the extraordinary events that struck the Earth at the end of the Cretaceous period. The disaster that ended their reign is believed to have begun on a day unlike any other, around 66 million years ago. A giant asteroid, about 6 miles wide, hurtled through space and crashed into the Earth near what is today the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. The force of the impact released energy equal to billions of nuclear bombs. In a fraction of a second, mountains of rock were vaporized, and a crater more than 120 miles wide was formed. The explosion sent fiery debris high into the sky, igniting forests and causing massive wildfires that spread across continents. Earthquakes shook the ground, and enormous waves or tsunamis surged through the oceans. The world was thrown into chaos almost instantly. Yet the worst was not only the direct destruction. The impact blasted so much dust, ash and sulfur into the atmosphere that sunlight was blocked for months or even years. Without sunlight, plants could not grow, and without plants, plant-eating dinosaurs like Triceratops starved. With the herbivores dying, meat-eaters like Tyrannosaurus had no food. A chain reaction unfolded that broke the balance of life across the planet. Temperatures dropped drastically in what scientists call an impact winter, and the Earth became a cold, dark and hostile place. It was a global disaster that even the most powerful creatures could not endure. For years, scientists debated whether it was the asteroid alone that caused the extinction, or if other factors played a role. Some evidence shows that massive volcanic eruptions, especially in an area of India known as the Deccan Traps, were also releasing enormous amounts of lava, ash, and toxic gases around the same time. These eruptions could have already been weakening ecosystems by changing the climate and poisoning the air and water before the asteroid struck. The combination of the two disasters may have created a perfect storm that overwhelmed even the toughest animals. When we imagine the world of the dinosaurs just before the extinction, it is important to picture it as a thriving place full of life. Triceratops herds may have moved across broad plains, feeding on ferns, cycads and flowering plants. Tyrannosaurus, with its powerful legs, may have hunted some of them, or scavenged carcasses left behind by other events. There were also many other species living beside them: duck-billed hadrosaurs, armored ankylosaurs, smaller raptors, flying pterosaurs, and marine reptiles like mosasaurs in the seas. It was a vibrant and dynamic world, filled with competition, adaptation, and survival. The sudden ending of this world was not only the disappearance of two famous dinosaurs, but the silencing of an entire era. The fossils of Tyrannosaurus and Triceratops tell us much about their lives and hint at their sudden end. In some sites, bones of Triceratops have been found with bite marks that match the teeth of T-Rex, showing direct evidence of predator-prey battles. In other places, skeletons of these dinosaurs are found in layers of rock that date to just before and after the asteroid impact. Above those layers, their fossils disappear completely, showing that they, like many others, were unable to cross into the next age. These sharp cut-offs in the fossil record reveal just how final the extinction was. It is haunting to imagine that the last Tyrannosaurus or Triceratops walked the Earth without knowing they were part of the end of an age. Perhaps the last Triceratops herds weakened as plants withered in the dim light, unable to find enough food. Perhaps the last Tyrannosaurus scavenged desperately, feeding on carcasses left behind as animals starved, until finally there was nothing left. The giant rulers of the land did not fall to predators stronger than themselves, but to the overwhelming changes of nature itself. What makes their disappearance so meaningful is not only the loss, but also the reminder of how fragile life can be. For millions of years, these creatures had adapted to every challenge, survived changing climates, and dominated ecosystems. Yet a single event, lasting only a moment on a cosmic timescale, was enough to bring them down. Their story is a lesson about the unpredictability of survival, showing that strength, size, and power cannot always guarantee endurance. Even though they are gone, Tyrannosaurus rex and Triceratops live on in our culture, in science, and in our imagination. Fossil discoveries continue to inspire wonder. Each bone uncovered from the earth is a piece of the story of their lives, a connection across millions of years. Museums display their skeletons to remind us of the incredible diversity that once existed. Movies, books, and art bring them back to life in ways that make us both fear and admire them. They have become symbols not only of extinction but also of endurance, for though their bodies are gone, their memory remains strong. Their disappearance also cleared the way for new life to rise. With the great dinosaurs gone, mammals, small furry creatures that had lived in the shadows for millions of years, found new opportunities to grow and expand. Over time, mammals evolved into a wide variety of forms, from tiny shrews to massive elephants, and eventually into primates and humans. In a way, the fall of Tyrannosaurus and Triceratops made it possible for us to exist today. Their extinction was both an end and a beginning, a closing of one chapter and the opening of another. If one thinks carefully, the disappearance of iconic dinosaurs like T-Rex and Triceratops is not only a story about the past, but also a warning for the future. It shows that life on Earth is always at the mercy of great changes, whether from space, from within the planet, or from our own actions. Just as dinosaurs once ruled the Earth and then vanished, so too could humanity face challenges we cannot fully control. The lesson of their extinction is that survival depends on adaptability, resilience, and the ability to face unexpected change. Scientists continue to study these ancient creatures not only to satisfy curiosity, but also to learn about extinction itself. Understanding how and why the dinosaurs disappeared helps us see patterns in how life responds to disaster. It allows us to recognize how delicate ecosystems can be and how easily they can collapse when struck by sudden changes. By piecing together the story of Tyrannosaurus and Triceratops, researchers also piece together the story of life itself and how it rises, flourishes, and sometimes falls. The disappearance of these great animals also connects us emotionally to deep time. To think that 66 million years ago, living creatures just as real as lions or elephants roamed the earth, and to know that they suddenly vanished, is a reminder of how small our own time truly is. It gives perspective on our place in history, showing that every age has its giants and that every age eventually ends. As children, many people first learn about dinosaurs through images of Tyrannosaurus rex and Triceratops locked in battle, predator against prey, horn against teeth. This image stays in the mind because it captures the drama of life long ago. But in truth, the greatest battle they faced was not with each other, but with the Earth itself, with forces beyond their control. In the end, neither the hunter nor the horned giant could survive. Their bones remain as silent witnesses to the catastrophe that reshaped the world. Fossil evidence of the post-impact world is like a silent diary left behind by the Earth itself. It is not written with ink or words, but with bones, shells, leaves, spores, and tiny traces of once living creatures pressed into rock and preserved through time. These records allow us to see what life was like immediately after the great catastrophe that happened around 66 million years ago, when a massive asteroid crashed into the Earth and changed everything. That single violent event brought an end to the reign of the great non-avian dinosaurs like Tyrannosaurus rex and Triceratops. But it also gave rise to a new age in which mammals, birds, and many other groups began to flourish. When we study fossils from the post-impact world, we are not only learning what species survived, but also how the survivors adapted to a world of darkness, hunger, and destruction, before slowly stepping into a time of recovery and new beginnings. The rocks from this period form a boundary in the Earth's crust that scientists call the Cretaceous-Paleogene boundary, sometimes shortened as the KPG boundary. It is one of the clearest lines in the fossil record, marking the end of the age of dinosaurs and the beginning of a new age for life. If you were to pick up a piece of rock from this layer, you might notice a thin line of clay that is unusually rich in iridium, a rare metal more common in space rocks than in Earth's crust. This iridium layer is like the signature of the asteroid impact, a global fingerprint that shows up in rocks all around the world. Above that layer, the fossils change dramatically. The mighty dinosaurs are gone, along with many marine reptiles, flying reptiles, and countless species of plants and small creatures. What remains are the fossils of survivors: tough ferns, tiny mammals, certain birds, crocodiles, turtles, and insects that managed to endure the chaos. One of the most striking pieces of fossil evidence from the post-impact world is the fern spike. Across many fossil sites, scientists find that right after the impact, fossilized pollen and spores of ferns suddenly became extremely abundant. This suggests that after forests were destroyed by wildfires and darkness, ferns were among the first plants to take over. Ferns are hardy and can quickly grow back in disturbed landscapes, even in soil covered with ash. In some ways, they are the green flags of recovery, telling us that life was already trying to rebound in the shadow of disaster. Imagine whole landscapes once covered with diverse forests now turned into wastelands of ferns, waving in the dim light as the Earth struggled through its time of healing. In the oceans, the fossil record tells another story. Before the asteroid hit, the seas were home to large marine reptiles like mosasaurs and plesiosaurs, as well as giant ammonites, which were coiled-shelled relatives of squid and octopus. After the impact, their fossils vanished from the record. These groups did not survive the collapse of food chains that followed the disaster. Tiny plankton called foraminifera, which form shells that fossilize well, also show a sharp decline at this boundary. Many large species of plankton disappeared, and only small, simple ones survived. This shows us that life in the oceans had to start almost from scratch, rebuilding food chains from the smallest organisms upward. The fossils of these tiny foraminifera are some of the most powerful pieces of evidence, because they allow scientists to measure how ecosystems collapsed and then slowly came back. On land, the fossils of mammals give us a clue about how survival and opportunity were tied together. During the age of dinosaurs, mammals existed mostly as small, shrew-like creatures that lived in the shadows. They were not as large or as dominant as the dinosaurs, but that may have been their advantage. Fossils from the Paleogene, the period right after the impact, show mammals beginning to diversify. Within just a few million years, mammals started to increase in size, fill new ecological roles, and spread across different environments. The fossil evidence tells a story of rapid adaptation. Small insect-eating mammals evolving into larger herbivores, predators, and eventually into forms that would give rise to the ancestors of modern primates, hoofed animals, and carnivores. Each fossil jawbone, tooth, or skeleton found in rocks from this time is like a page from the storybook of mammal evolution, showing how quickly life can rise when space is left open. Bird fossils from the post-impact world also hold important clues. The dinosaurs that survived were not the giant ones with teeth and claws, but rather the small feathered ones that we now recognize as early birds. Fossils show that some groups of birds with specialized diets, such as those that ate only seeds, had a better chance of survival. Seeds could stay buried in the ground during the period of darkness and cold, waiting to sprout when conditions improved, and birds that could feed on them found a steady food supply. Over time, these survivors diversified into the many forms of birds we see today, from songbirds to waterfowl. Fossil wings, beaks, and feathers preserved in stone remind us that even in the darkest times, resilience found a way to carry forward the lineage of dinosaurs in a new form. Another fascinating part of the fossil evidence comes from insects and their role in the ecosystem. Insect fossils and the marks they left behind, such as bite marks on fossilized leaves, show that they too survived and adapted. Some groups may have even taken advantage of the new conditions, feeding on the dead and decaying matter left behind by the catastrophe. Fossils of termite nests and beetle burrows tell us that insects were quick to reclaim their role in recycling nutrients, helping ecosystems recover from the devastation. Without insects, the rebirth of forests and the return of balanced food chains would have been far slower. When we look at the fossil record of freshwater animals like turtles, crocodiles, and amphibians, we see that many of them made it through the impact. Fossil shells and bones of turtles are found both below and above the impact boundary, showing that they managed to endure. Their ability to live in water, bury themselves in mud, and survive on little food for long periods may have been their secret. Crocodiles, with their flexible diets and aquatic lifestyles, also appear in the fossil record after the catastrophe, almost unchanged from their earlier forms. These fossils remind us that survival was not always about intelligence or speed, but sometimes about being adaptable and tough enough to wait out the storm. The fossil record also shows a period of global silence. In some layers of rock, immediately above the impact boundary, there are far fewer fossils than below. This gap represents a time when ecosystems were nearly empty, when extinction had taken away so many creatures that the Earth seemed quieter. This silence in the rocks is as telling as the fossils themselves. It reminds us that there were moments when life hung by a thread, when survival was uncertain, and when recovery was not guaranteed. Yet slowly, layer by layer, fossils return in greater numbers, showing that the world was healing. One of the most detailed fossil sites that reveals the story of the post-impact world is found in North Dakota in the United States, at a place called Tanis. This site preserves evidence of what happened in the hours and days right after the asteroid struck. Fossils of fish are found with tiny glassy spheres in their gills, believed to be bits of molten rock thrown into the air by the impact. These fish died quickly, buried by waves stirred up in rivers and lakes far from the ocean. This site is like a snapshot of the catastrophe itself, capturing the chaos that set the stage for the post-impact world. From sites like Tanis to many others across the globe, the rocks speak to us with their quiet testimony. The fossil evidence also tells us how long recovery took. While the initial devastation was quick, with mass extinctions happening within a short span of time, the rebuilding of ecosystems stretched across millions of years. Some groups, like ferns and small plankton, bounced back quickly. Others, like large mammals and forests of flowering plants, took much longer. By studying fossils across different ages, scientists can trace how long it took before diversity returned to pre-impact levels. The story is not one of instant rebirth, but of slow, uneven progress. It shows us that the Earth's resilience is strong, but it works on timescales far longer than human lifetimes. Fossils also highlight the differences between places. In some regions, certain groups survived better than in others. For example, in what is now South America, fossil mammals show early signs of diversification, while in other areas recovery was slower. In the oceans, different species of plankton recovered at different rates depending on local conditions. The fossil record does not show a single, uniform story of recovery, but a patchwork of survival and rebirth, each region contributing its own chapter. As we read these fossil records, we see more than just the survival of species. We see the survival of life itself in all its forms: plants sprouting in ash-covered soil, fish finding food in recovering rivers, mammals scurrying through ferns, and birds taking flight over a world that was no longer ruled by towering reptiles. Each fossil is a reminder of the fragility of life, but also of its incredible ability to endure. The fossils of the post-impact world are not just scientific data, they are symbols of hope and resilience, showing that even in the face of overwhelming destruction, life can find a way forward. In truth, the fossil evidence of the post-impact world is like a story told in stone. It begins with loss, continues with silence, then grows into a tale of persistence and renewal. The bones of small mammals, the shells of plankton, the spores of ferns, the teeth of fish, and the wings of birds all combine to paint a picture of a world both wounded and healing. For millions of years after the asteroid struck, the Earth was reshaped and life carved out new paths. Without these fossils, we would only guess at what happened. With them, we can see the steps of recovery with remarkable clarity. When we talk about the end of the mighty dinosaurs, our minds often rush immediately to the dramatic asteroid impact that happened about 66 million years ago. That single moment in time has been made famous as the killer of the dinosaurs, and in many ways it was indeed the final blow. Yet the true story is more complicated than a single rock from space. For millions of years before that asteroid struck, the world of the dinosaurs had already been changing. The climate was shifting in slow but powerful ways, reshaping landscapes, altering food sources, and testing the ability of even the most adaptable creatures to survive. The asteroid may have ended their age quickly, but climate change played a quieter, long-term role in wearing them down, making them more vulnerable to extinction when disaster finally came. To understand this, we must imagine the world not as a single dramatic event, but as a slow-moving play where the scenery and the stage itself were gradually being altered until the actors could no longer perform. During the long span of the Mesozoic era, which stretched from more than 250 million years ago to about 66 million years ago, dinosaurs thrived in many forms. For much of that time, Earth's climate was warm and stable. Lush forests stretched across continents, even in regions that are now covered by ice. Seas were higher, spreading shallow waters across lowlands. This warm, stable world allowed dinosaurs to spread into almost every environment, from deserts to coastal swamps. They grew into giants like the long-necked sauropods, fierce hunters like Tyrannosaurus, and horned herbivores like Triceratops. But the climate is never fixed forever. Over time, Earth's atmosphere, oceans, and land masses began to change, and those shifts slowly reshaped the conditions in which dinosaurs lived. One of the biggest forces driving long-term climate change during the late age of dinosaurs was the movement of Earth's continents. The supercontinent Pangaea, which had once gathered nearly all the land into one vast mass, had broken apart. Over millions of years, the pieces drifted farther away from each other. This changed the shape of oceans and the paths of currents that carry heat around the planet. As the continents moved, new mountains rose, seas opened and closed, and coastlines shifted. All of these changes affected rainfall, wind patterns, and seasonal temperatures. For dinosaurs that had evolved in one type of environment, these changes could make life harder. For example, when continents split apart, climates in the interior of those new land masses often became drier because moist ocean winds could no longer reach far inland. This meant that some lush forests shrank, turning into open woodlands or dry plains. Dinosaurs that depended on thick forests for food or shelter had to adapt to more open landscapes. Some could, but others struggled. Over long periods, such gradual loss of habitat weakened populations, making them less resilient to other threats. At the same time, volcanic activity was reshaping the climate on a global scale. Huge eruptions released massive amounts of carbon dioxide and other gases into the atmosphere. These eruptions were not brief explosions like modern volcanoes, but rather enormous, long-lasting outpourings of lava that covered entire regions for hundreds of thousands of years. One of the most dramatic examples was the Deccan Traps in what is now India. Beginning millions of years before the asteroid impact, these eruptions released gases that caused fluctuations in global temperatures. Sometimes the Earth warmed sharply, while at other times chemical reactions in the oceans and atmosphere pulled temperatures back down. For living things, this back and forth of hot and cooler periods created stress. Dinosaurs, like all animals, were adapted to certain temperature ranges and food supplies. When the world warmed too much, polar regions that had once been comfortable with mild climates became hotter, stressing the plants and animals there. When it cooled, tropical and subtropical zones lost some of the lush vegetation that many dinosaurs relied upon. These swings may not have been instantly deadly, but over millions of years they added strain to ecosystems. Another important part of this story is how climate change affected plants. Dinosaurs depended on plants directly, if they were herbivores, or indirectly, if they were carnivores that hunted plant eaters. During the late Cretaceous period, flowering plants spread rapidly. While this may sound like a positive development, it also meant that older types of vegetation like cycads and conifers, which had been the staple food of many large dinosaurs, began to decline. Changing climates accelerated this shift. In regions where rainfall patterns changed or temperatures swung, the composition of plant life could change drastically. Some dinosaurs may not have been able to adjust their diets quickly enough, especially the larger species that needed vast amounts of food each day. At the same time, the cooling and drying trends in some areas created more open grassland-like environments, though true grasses had not yet become widespread. Dinosaurs that were adapted to forests might have found fewer hiding places or nesting sites in such environments. For predators, this meant their prey became more exposed, but for herbivores it meant greater vulnerability. The delicate balance between predator and prey was constantly being altered by climate pressures. We should also remember that climate change did not happen in isolation. It often worked hand in hand with other challenges. For instance, rising and falling sea levels, partly caused by climate changes, constantly reshaped coastlines and flooded lowland habitats. In some eras, large shallow seas covered much of the continents, creating warm, humid environments that supported abundant life. But when those seas retreated, they left behind drier inland regions where fewer plants could grow. Dinosaurs that once thrived along coastlines had to move or adapt to inland environments, which may not have supported them as well. Fossil evidence shows that by the very end of the Cretaceous period, some groups of dinosaurs were already in decline. Sauropods, the giant long-necked dinosaurs that had dominated earlier ages, had become rare in many parts of the world. Some large predator groups were also shrinking in diversity. While iconic species like Tyrannosaurus rex and Triceratops were still present, they represented the last strongholds of lineages that were no longer as widespread or varied as they once had been. Climate stress, combined with changing vegetation and habitats, likely played a key role in this long-term thinning of diversity. It is also worth considering how these climate changes would have affected reproduction and survival of young dinosaurs. Many dinosaurs laid eggs in nests on the ground. Climate fluctuations could make nesting sites less stable, whether through flooding, drought, or temperature extremes. If too many nesting seasons failed in a row, populations could fall even without adults dying in large numbers. Climate pressures might also have affected the timing of migrations or the availability of seasonal food sources. For species that relied on precise cycles, even small disruptions could cause declines over time. All of these factors meant that by the time the asteroid struck 66 million years ago, dinosaurs were already living in a world that was less favourable than it had once been. They were not doomed yet. After all, they had survived many millions of years of change, but they were under pressure. Climate change had gradually eroded their numbers and reduced their diversity, leaving fewer species and smaller populations. This made them more fragile. When the asteroid impact created its sudden chaos of fires, darkness, and global cooling, dinosaurs were no longer as resilient as they might once have been. Imagine two different worlds. In one, dinosaurs are thriving in countless species, spread across diverse habitats, with strong populations and adaptable traits. In that world, even a terrible catastrophe might leave more survivors, enough to rebuild. In the other world, dinosaurs are fewer, their habitats already shrinking, their diets more restricted, and their populations already stressed by a long series of climate challenges. In that weakened state, a sudden catastrophe becomes overwhelming. The evidence suggests that the second world was the reality. This does not mean climate change alone would have wiped out dinosaurs. After all, they had endured many earlier shifts in Earth's climate, including warming and cooling cycles, sea level changes, and volcanic events. But the particular combination of a late Cretaceous climate instability and the asteroid impact was deadly. Climate change played the role of a slow, grinding pressure that left the dinosaurs vulnerable. The asteroid was the sudden hammer blow that finished what the slow squeeze had begun. When we reflect on this, it reminds us that extinction is rarely the result of one single cause. It is often a chain of connected events, with long-term pressures making species weaker until a sudden shock pushes them over the edge. In the case of dinosaurs, climate change was one of the most important of those long-term pressures. The fossil record tells this story in subtle ways. In rocks dating to the last few million years before the impact, we see fewer kinds of dinosaurs in some regions compared to earlier times. The mix of plants and fossilized pollen shows that forests were shifting, with older types disappearing and newer flowering plants taking over. Layers of ancient soil and sediments reveal cycles of drought and flooding. Even chemical traces in the rocks hint at changes in carbon dioxide levels and ocean chemistry, markers of global climate shifts. All these clues point toward a world where conditions were becoming more difficult for the great reptiles long before the asteroid appeared in the sky. In the grand sweep of Earth's history, climate change has repeatedly played a role in shaping life, sometimes slowly and sometimes suddenly. For the dinosaurs, it was a long, steady pressure that weakened their world. Without it, perhaps they might have faced the asteroid with more resilience. With it, they were left too vulnerable to withstand the final blow. When we look back at the story of our planet, few events were as dramatic and as world-changing as the Great Extinction that marked the end of the age of the dinosaurs. This event, which happened around 66 million years ago, was more than just the disappearance of gigantic reptiles that once ruled the land, seas, and skies. It was a turning point that reshaped the entire balance of life on Earth. The loss of the dinosaurs and so many other creatures was not only the ending of one chapter, but also the beginning of another. It opened the way for new creatures to rise, adapt, and flourish in a world that had been shaken to its very core. In this way, the extinction was not just about death and destruction. it was also about renewal, survival, and transformation. To understand how the extinction shaped the future of Earth's animals, we must imagine the world before, during, and after this catastrophic event, and then follow the long journey of life as it struggled to rebuild itself over millions upon millions of years. Before the asteroid struck and before the Earth changed forever, dinosaurs had lived on the planet for more than 160 million years. They had grown into an extraordinary variety of forms, towering plant-eaters like Brachiosaurus that stretched their necks toward the highest treetops, fierce hunters like Tyrannosaurus rex whose very presence filled their world with fear, and smaller bird-like dinosaurs that darted swiftly across the forests and plains. Alongside them lived flying reptiles called pterosaurs, marine reptiles like mosasaurs and plesiosaurs, and countless other creatures that made the Mesozoic era one of the most vibrant times in the history of life. Mammals existed too, but they were mostly small, shrew-sized animals that lived in the shadows of the dinosaurs. They hid in burrows, hunted insects, and scurried about in the dark. In the great drama of life at that time, dinosaurs had the starring roles, while mammals were only minor characters. The balance of life seemed fixed and steady, and it might have stayed that way if not for a sudden disaster from the sky. When a huge asteroid, around 10 kilometers wide, slammed into the Earth near what is now the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, the world was instantly thrown into chaos. The impact released energy equal to billions of nuclear bombs, throwing massive amounts of dust and vapor into the atmosphere. This blocked out sunlight, plunging the planet into a kind of dark and freezing night that lasted for months, perhaps even years. Plants could not grow without sunlight, and as they died, the animals that depended on them also began to starve. Forests withered, grasslands turned to wastelands, and oceans became less welcoming. Fires raged across continents, tsunamis swept across coasts, and earthquakes shook the land. It was a disaster so complete that more than 3/4 of all species on Earth vanished. Among them were the non-avian dinosaurs, which had been the dominant rulers of the land for so long. In one geological instant their reign was over. Yet while this was a tragedy, it was also a moment that shaped the future. When the dinosaurs disappeared, many of the creatures that had once lived in their shadow suddenly had room to expand. Ecosystems that had been dominated by towering giants were now open landscapes filled with opportunities. Mammals, which had survived the catastrophe by staying small, hiding in burrows, and eating whatever they could find, were especially well prepared to take advantage of the new world. They could live on seeds, roots, insects, and even carrion, making them flexible survivors. While the giant dinosaurs could not cope with the sudden changes, the mammals endured, and their story was only just beginning. In the first few million years after the extinction, the Earth was still recovering. Life was fragile, but slowly and steadily it began to rebuild. The earliest mammals after the dinosaurs' disappearance were still small, but they began to explore new possibilities. Freed from the constant threat of giant predators, some mammals grew larger. Others adapted to new diets and habitats. Over millions of years, this gave rise to an astonishing burst of evolution. Some mammals returned to the seas, eventually giving rise to whales, dolphins, and seals. Others climbed trees, becoming the ancestors of monkeys, apes, and eventually humans. Still others stayed on the ground, evolving into horses, elephants, big cats, and countless other creatures that now fill our world. The loss of the dinosaurs, in a strange way, allowed the mammals to step into the spotlight, transforming them from background characters into the new rulers of the animal kingdom. But mammals were not the only ones who benefited from the extinction. Birds, which are in fact the only surviving dinosaurs, also flourished in the new world. These feathered creatures, which had already developed during the time of their dinosaur relatives, survived the catastrophe because of their smaller size, their ability to fly, and their varied diets. After the extinction, they spread across the Earth, filling the skies with their songs and adapting to nearly every environment. Some grew into powerful hunters like eagles and owls, while others became flightless giants like ostriches and penguins. The world without large, land-dwelling dinosaurs gave birds the freedom to diversify into the thousands of species we see today. Every time we watch a sparrow hop on the ground or a hawk soar above the fields, we're witnessing the legacy of the extinction and the survival of a dinosaur lineage that never completely ended. Reptiles too found ways to adapt in the new Earth. Though their gigantic cousins like mosasaurs and pterosaurs vanished, turtles, lizards, snakes, and crocodiles survived the Great Extinction. These animals had traits that allowed them to endure the hard times. Crocodiles, for example, could live for long periods without food and were able to survive in rivers and wetlands that remained somewhat stable, even when much of the land was devastated. Turtles and lizards were small and could feed on simple diets. Snakes, which were already flexible predators, thrived in the new order, and over time they spread into every corner of the globe. Though they were no longer the dominant reptiles of the Earth, their survival ensured that the reptilian branch of life would continue strongly into the future. The extinction also shaped the oceans in powerful ways. When giant marine reptiles disappeared, new groups of animals rose to take their place. Sharks, which had already been present for hundreds of millions of years, expanded into many different forms and became some of the most successful predators of the seas. Bony fishes also diversified, filling the waters with dazzling variety. In time, mammals such as whales and dolphins joined them, creating entirely new dynamics in the oceans. The extinction had cleared away the old rulers of the seas, but it had opened the doors for new ones to emerge. Insects and other small creatures also played a crucial role in shaping the new Earth. With so many plants wiped out, insects had to adapt, but their ability to reproduce quickly and in huge numbers gave them an advantage. They evolved alongside the new flowering plants that spread rapidly after the extinction, creating fresh relationships between pollinators and plants. This partnership between insects and flowering plants helped shape the modern landscapes we know today, filled with colourful flowers and buzzing with bees, butterflies, and other pollinators. Without the extinction, the rise of these ecosystems might have been much slower, but the disaster sped up the process and gave the world its vibrant plant-animal partnerships. Over millions of years, the Earth became a place full of new possibilities, all shaped by the absence of the dinosaurs. Mammals grew into every imaginable form, from tiny shrews to massive elephants. Birds filled the skies and became one of the most diverse groups of animals on the planet. Reptiles continued to adapt and spread. Insects and flowering plants built thriving ecosystems together. Even amphibians found new niches in the reshaped world. In this way, the extinction acted as a kind of reset button for life, giving a fresh start that eventually led to the modern world we know. Perhaps the most fascinating part of this story is how it eventually led to us, humans. If the dinosaurs had never gone extinct, it is very unlikely that mammals would have risen to become the dominant group on Earth. Without that rise, primates might never have evolved into apes, and apes might never have evolved into humans. The asteroid that ended the age of dinosaurs in a sense set the stage for the age of humans. Every time we look at our own reflection, we are seeing the result of that ancient catastrophe. The extinction was not just about the past, it shaped the very existence of our species and the animals we share the planet with. The Earth's animals today, whether lions in Africa, bears in the Arctic, dolphins in the oceans, or even the pets in our homes, are all part of the long story that followed the extinction. They are the descendants of survivors, the heirs of creatures that endured the darkest times in Earth's history. Every feather, every claw, every paw print, and every songbird's call is a reminder of the resilience of life and the way disaster can reshape the future. It is a story not only of loss but of triumph, not only of endings but of beginnings. The extinction that destroyed so much also created the conditions for new wonders to appear. When we consider this, we see that the extinction was not just a tragedy for the dinosaurs, but a turning point for all life on Earth. It showed that even the greatest and most powerful creatures are not immune to sudden change. It showed that survival often depends not on size or strength, but on adaptability, flexibility, and resilience. And it showed that out of destruction can come renewal, leading to a world as rich and diverse as the one we live in today. If we stretch our imagination further, we might even think of the extinction as part of a larger pattern. Throughout Earth's history, there have been several mass extinctions. Each time, countless species were lost, but each time, life rebounded in new and often surprising directions. The disappearance of the dinosaurs was just one of these events, though it may be the most famous. And like the others, it reshaped the tree of life in ways that would have been impossible to predict. The story reminds us that Earth is never static. It is always changing, always evolving, always finding new ways to fill the empty spaces left by what has been lost. Today, when we look at the incredible variety of animals around us, from the tiniest insect to the largest whale, we are seeing the living results of that ancient catastrophe. The extinction shaped their ancestors, opened pathways for their evolution, and gave rise to the ecosystems we depend on. In the most direct sense, the extinction made the modern world possible. Without it, the dinosaurs might still roam the earth, and the mammals, including us, might still be hiding in the shadows. Instead, life has moved forward into a future that no one could have imagined 66 million years ago. The oceans of our planet have always been full of life, but the story changed over time. When the great asteroid struck the Earth, it did not just wipe out the giant dinosaurs on land, it also reshaped the oceans in ways that were just as powerful and long-lasting. The seas of that ancient world were very different from what we see today. They held huge reptiles that glided through the waters, fish with strange shapes and armour, squid-like creatures with spiral shells, and coral reefs that stretched far and wide. The catastrophe that ended the age of the dinosaurs did not spare the seas, and the marine environment went through a massive transformation. Over millions of years, ocean life rebuilt itself, changed forms, and created entirely new ecosystems that eventually gave rise to the rich and diverse seas that we know today. When the asteroid struck, the explosion released enormous amounts of energy, as if billions of nuclear bombs had gone off at once. Rocks and dust were blasted into the sky, and this darkened the Earth for many months and possibly even years. On land, this sudden darkness caused plants to wither, and the dinosaurs and many other animals soon starved. In the oceans, something similar happened. Much of marine life depended on sunlight because tiny floating plants, called phytoplankton, form the base of the ocean's food chain. These microscopic plants need light to make their food through photosynthesis. When the skies turned dark, the phytoplankton could not grow properly. Without them, the small animals that fed on them, such as zooplankton, suffered. And without these small creatures, the larger fish, reptiles, and other predators had little to eat. The crash at the base of the food chain meant that life in the seas faced one of the toughest challenges in its long history. One of the groups that was hit the hardest were the ammonites, marine animals related to modern squid and octopus, but with coiled shells. Ammonites had survived earlier mass extinctions and had thrived for hundreds of millions of years, filling the seas with countless shapes and sizes. But after the asteroid, the lack of food and the changing environment meant that ammonites disappeared completely. Their extinction opened up space in the oceans for other creatures to evolve and take their place. The giant marine reptiles like mosasaurs and plesiosaurs also vanished. These enormous hunters, which once ruled the seas like the dinosaurs ruled the land, left behind empty roles in the ecosystem that would eventually be filled by other groups of animals. The coral reefs, which are among the most important habitats in the ocean, also suffered greatly. Many ancient reefs were built by a type of marine creature called rudis bivalves, which were relatives of clams. These reef builders were wiped out during the disaster, leaving reefs empty and damaged. It took millions of years before new types of corals, more like the ones we know today, began to dominate and rebuild these ecosystems. The loss of reefs meant that countless species of fish and other small creatures lost their homes, and it took a long time for reefs to become vibrant centres of life again. Yet even in the face of such destruction, life found ways to adapt and recover. Some groups of animals managed to survive the catastrophe and would go on to shape the oceans of the future. Sharks, for example, endured extinction. They lost many species, but enough survived that they were able to spread out into new roles in the seas. The same was true for bony fish, the ancestors of most fish living today. After the extinction, fish evolved into many new shapes and sizes, filling empty spaces in the food chain and becoming the dominant group in the oceans. Another group that survived were the tiny plankton that built shells from calcium carbonate. While many species were wiped out, some made it through the dark years after the impact. These survivors gave rise to the modern plankton that still float in our seas today. Because plankton are the foundation of the ocean food chain, their recovery was essential for everything else in the marine environment to recover. Over time, as light returned and conditions stabilized, plankton flourished again, and with them the rest of marine life began to grow and diversify. Whales and dolphins, which are mammals that live in the ocean today, did not yet exist at the time of the dinosaurs. But their distant ancestors, small land mammals survived the catastrophe. Millions of years later, some of these mammals returned to the sea and evolved into the first whales. The fact that mammals were able to survive the extinction and later spread into the oceans shows how the disaster not only ended some forms of life, but also opened doors for entirely new ones. The extinction also had long-term effects on ocean chemistry and climate. When the asteroid hit, it caused massive wildfires and released huge amounts of carbon dioxide and sulfur into the atmosphere. Rain mixed with these chemicals and fell into the seas, making the oceans more acidic. This acidification made it difficult for creatures that built shells or skeletons out of calcium carbonate to survive. Many groups of shell-building creatures, like some mollusks and plankton, declined sharply. However, the survivors slowly adapted, and over millions of years the oceans recovered their balance. This shift in ocean chemistry permanently influenced which groups of marine animals would dominate in the future. One of the most striking changes after the extinction was the rise of modern fish. Before the disaster, many fish had heavy armoured bodies, but after the extinction, lighter and faster fish began to dominate. These new fish were more agile and could quickly escape predators. Over time, they spread into nearly every corner of the ocean, from shallow reefs to deep waters. Their success allowed them to become the most common vertebrates in the seas today. When you see schools of fish swimming together, you're looking at the descendants of those survivors who took advantage of the empty seas, left after the dinosaurs' age ended. Seabirds also began to rise in importance after the extinction. While the large flying reptiles, the pterosaurs, had dominated the skies above the oceans during the age of the dinosaurs, they did not survive the asteroid impact. Their disappearance allowed birds to take over many of their roles. Some birds became skilled fish hunters, diving into the seas to catch prey. Others developed the ability to travel long distances over the oceans. Over time, seabirds became a vital part of marine ecosystems, spreading nutrients as they traveled and connecting the land and sea in unique ways. In the millions of years that followed the extinction, the seas became testing grounds for new evolutionary experiments. Marine mammals like whales and seals appeared, birds adapted to life on the coasts and oceans, sharks and rays evolved into many specialized forms, and corals once again built great reefs that became nurseries for countless fish. Each of these changes was possible only because the asteroid had cleared away so many of the old rulers of the sea, giving survivors the chance to evolve in new directions. If we look at today's oceans with their dazzling variety of life, we are really seeing the results of that ancient catastrophe. Without the asteroid, ammonites might still be swimming in the seas, and giant reptiles might still be the top predators, but instead the seas are filled with whales, dolphins, seabirds, modern corals, and an incredible range of fish. The marine environments we see now are a product of survival, adaptation, and millions of years of rebuilding after one of the greatest disasters in Earth's history. The oceans endured darkness, acidification, and the collapse of food chains, yet over time they blossomed again into ecosystems full of wonder. From the smallest plankton to the largest whales, every creature in the ocean today carries within it the history of survival and change that began on that terrible day 66 million years ago.